Chapter 1820. This time, Feng Zi had created a divine object that could allow one to fly. He had to prove to his father that the son of Cheng Yaojin could also be the number one in the sky. In the future, in the Cheng family, in Cheng and in the entire circle of hedonistic young masters, who would dare to look down on Lao Tzu? Even if he met Li Chengqian in the future, Feng Yai and the others would have the right to brag. Hey, Lao Tzu flew up a few days ago, did you guys go up? After saying that, he flicked his sleeves and left. Maybe he could anger these guys to death, haha. Of course, he was not the only one who had this idea. Zhang Sunchong and Du Go had even more ideas than him, especially Zhang Sunchong. He was the son of Zhang Sun Wuji, and his uncle was the current emperor, a standard aristocrat. However, it was a pity that he was the same as Cheng Chumo, living under the shadow of his father Zhang Sun Wuji. Every day he thought about how to make contributions and how to surpass his father. However, his father's halo was not something he could easily break. Thus, he hung around with Cheng Chumo, and slowly, the name of Cheng and hedonistic young master spread. Until today, when Feng Zi invented the hot air balloon, he thought that once he flew up, he would be able to make a name for himself again. However, who would have thought that this damn Cheng Chumo would beat him to it? This made his heart sour, but there was nothing he could do. He was not a match for Cheng Chumo, that big guy. There was no way he could compete with him. Now that Feng Zi insisted on doing some damned experiment, wasn't that stopping his good deed of flying up? This would not do, he had to stop it. Thinking of this, he quickly said, Feng Zi, you can't just ignore us? We are all waiting for you to fly up. While speaking, he intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Du Go and gave him a look. The latter immediately understood. After all, he also did not fly up. He quickly said, Yes, Feng Zi, we helped you do so much work just now. Now, we can't just let it go. In fact, he was the most unbalanced in his heart. Why could Cheng Chumo fly up first? He and Zhang Sun had to wait here? This was too unfair. He also wanted to ascend to the heavens. He also wanted to show off in front of others. He also wanted to raise his head in front of his father. He glared at Zhang Feng with an aggressive look as if he was saying, If you don't let me go up to the sky, I'll fight you to the death today. Zhang Feng chose to ignore these guys' rudeness. He took a deep breath and directly cursed, Motherf asterisk cur. If I don't do the experiment, why don't you go up to the sky and die? You guys only did a little bit of work, and now you're here crying for your parents. Do you even look like men? If you don't want to go to heaven, scram for Lao Tzu. The scolding made the three of them a little confused, but they were more worried because they were afraid that Zhang Feng was really angry. If that happened, wouldn't their dreams of ascending to heaven be ruined? Thinking of this, Cheng Chumo couldn't care less about his face. He scratched his head and smiled foolishly. Feng Zi, don't be angry. We're just worried that you won't let us go up to the sky. Yes, Feng Zi, we don't know what you're doing this experiment for, and we can't help you. Why don't we? Zhang Sun looked at Zhang Feng timidly. He wanted to say something but stopped. In any case, his words couldn't leave the words go up to the sky. Lao Tzu knows what you're thinking, but now you'd better sit down. Zhang Feng glanced at the three of them and suppressed the anger in his heart. This experiment is to modify the hot air balloon. If you guys go up to the hot air balloon now, what if you die in an accident? If that happens, Lao Tzu will have to carry your coffins. The three of them looked bitter and didn't know what to say. In fact, they all knew that the hot air balloon was still a little dangerous. Could be seen from the experiment just now, but when they heard Feng Zi say this, their hearts trembled a little. This was especially true for Cheng Chumo. His heart was like a mirror. Just now, when he was in the sky, there was no safety at all. He was completely under the control of the wind. If it weren't for his fat body, perhaps something really would have happened. But when he thought about how he bragged to his father, Li Chengqian, and the others about going up to the sky, he still felt good. The corner of his mouth couldn't help but raise a proud smile. If something happened now, it wouldn't be worth it. Thinking of this, he quickly smiled and said, Feng Zi, we'll listen to you. We'll do whatever you say. Experiment now. After saying that, he used his elbow to nudge Zhang Sun. indicating that the other party should speak up and stop talking back. The latter immediately understood and imitated Chang Chumo, revealing a silly smile. Yes, yes, yes. Feng Zi will listen to you. Whoever dares to not do the experiment, Lao Tzu will chop him up today. While speaking, he intentionally or unintentionally glared at Du Go, as if he was talking about Du Go. This scared Du Go, and he quickly cupped his hands and said, Feng Zi, I'll listen to you, whatever you say. Chapter 18:21. Zhang Feng was amused by the looks of these three guys. Couldn't be helped. These three guys changed their faces too quickly. Just a second ago they wanted to go to heaven. Now they had surrendered. He couldn't help but give these three guys a thumbs up. Yes, yes, you guys have this awareness. After the hot air balloon is successfully modified, I promise to send you guys to heaven together. Send us to heaven? Chang Chumo frowned. These words, why did it feel a little strange? But after thinking about it carefully, it didn't seem to be a problem. The hot air balloon was heaven. After thinking about it for a while, he revealed a silly smile. Okay, okay, okay. As long as it's Feng Zi's words, we will listen. Yes, yes, yes. We will listen. Zhang Sun Chong also quickly echoed. In that case, all of you gather around. Zhang Feng glanced at everyone, then looked at Ma Zhou and said, Ma Zhou, go and get some salt water for me. Let's start the experiment. Ma Zhou was very fast. In less than a cigarette, he brought the salt water over. Teacher, the salt water is here. He held a basin in his hand. There was still a lot of coarse salt that had not melted. Zhang Feng nodded. He turned around and took a piece of cotton cloth. He immersed the cotton cloth in the salt water. After it had completely absorbed the salt water, he slowly took it out. Then, he wrung the cotton cloth and put it aside. He picked up the small iron can and checked it. After confirming that there was no problem, he began to wrap it. Now all of you look carefully. Although you won't be able to use it, it's good to learn more knowledge. He said to everyone as he wrapped it. He didn't forget to impart knowledge while working. He was really tireless. As he spoke, the cotton cloth had already wrapped the small iron can in layers. He only stopped when he had wrapped 3 layers. Then, he put the wrapped small iron can into the big iron can. All the preparations were finally completed. He smoked a cigarette to reward himself. Zhang Feng took out a cigarette from his waist and the lighter automatically passed to him. He turned his head and saw that it was Zhang Sun Chong. Since someone passed him the lighter, he did not hold back. He stretched out the cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath and held it in his hand. He looked at Zhang Sun Chong and smiled. You go and pour the coal into the big iron pot. You also need to pour the small iron pot. Do you remember? Zhang Sun had just started the fire, so how could he have the nerve to order him around? He could only let this kid suffer a little. Chang Chumo didn't waste any time. He nodded his head like a chicken pecking at rice. He hurriedly took the coal and went in. He didn't let go until it was full of coal. Teacher, what should we do now? Ma Zhou tilted his head and asked curiously. Zhang Feng didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Chang Chumo with a sinister smile on his face. Go and stuff the 2 iron rods into the coal outside the small iron can. Chang Chumo frowned. He had a bad premonition. Why should I do it? He was a little dissatisfied and pointed at Ma Zhou. Wasn't he the one who asked just now? Why don't you let him do it? Just do it. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Zhang Feng raised his eyebrows and kicked Chang Chumo's butt. Chang Chumo snorted with a little grievance, but he still took the iron rods as instructed. This guy was very strong. It seemed that he wanted to take back all the anger he had suffered from Zhang Feng through the iron rods. He stabbed the iron rods fiercely and didn't stop until he heard the cracking sound of coal breaking. Teacher, this... Hao Chujun pointed at Chang Chumo and looked at Zhang Feng. He was so anxious that he couldn't speak. He was afraid that the other party would destroy the experiment equipment. Zhang Feng didn't seem to care. He waved his hand to indicate that it was fine because he knew that the tighter the coal, the better. That way, the electrical resistance would be greater. Besides, if there was an electric current, he wouldn't be the one who was injured. Why was he so nervous? Seeing that their teacher didn't stop him, As students, Hao Chujun and Ma Zhou couldn't say anything. They could only stand aside and watch. However, the incessant sound like a cat scratching was really uncomfortable. The two of them simply covered their ears and ignored the devastation of the killing genius in front of them. After about the time it took to smoke a cigarette, Chang Chumo stopped. The coal was almost all pounded. Not a single piece was intact. The iron rods were completely inserted. It looked good. How is it? How's my job? He wiped the sweat on his forehead and looked proud. It was as if he had completed the experiment. Zhang Feng curled his lips and went forward to take a look. It looked good, but he didn't know what happened to the voltage. Iron Bull. Put your hand on the two iron rods and see the effect. He looked at Chang Chumo and revealed a malicious smile. However, Chang Chumo wasn't stupid. He seemed to have seen through the trick and hurriedly waved his hand. I've done so much work just now. Shouldn't you change to another person? You can't keep tricking the same person, right? Even if you're really a bull, you still need to rest. After saying that, he sat on the ground and looked like he didn't want to get up. He wasn't interested in this experiment. He just wanted to show off to the heavens. Now that he had done so much, of course he didn't want to get up. Not to mention that smile of Fengzi's just now. At just thinking about it wouldn't be a good thing. Chapter 1822. Zhang Feng saw that this guy was acting shamelessly and did not want to waste time on him. Instead, he looked at Zhang Sun and Chong and said with a smile, "Which one of you wants to go? Don't try to shirk the responsibility. The person who goes will be rewarded with a heavenly benefit." "I'll go." Zhang Sun pushed Du Go aside and raised his right hand, as if he was afraid that someone would take it away from him. In fact, before Zhang Feng mentioned the heavenly benefit, he was very repulsed. Why? Because he saw the problem with Feng Zi's smile and saw Tai Nyo shirking the responsibility. He already knew that there was something wrong with these two iron rods. However, when Feng Zi mentioned the heavenly benefit, his eyes immediately turned green. Who could resist the temptation of the heavens? It was impossible for Zhang Sun to be the first one to go. Why should Chang Chumo be the first one to go? Lao Tzu also wanted to go. Moreover, he wanted these guys to watch from the ground and let the rich kids of Chong and City watch. At this moment, he seemed to imagine being worshipped by tens of thousands of people. When he thought of this, the corner of his mouth raised into a smug smile. He exaggeratedly rolled up his sleeves and looked like a hero dying for justice. After doing all this, he glanced at the crowd proudly and then walked toward the iron rod. He chose to ignore the disdainful looks from the crowd and touched the iron rod with a smug face. Of course, all this was on the surface. He was still nervous because he did not know what would happen. This was the nervousness of the unknown. Not only him, but Zhang Feng was also nervous. He was the most nervous person in the crowd because he knew what was about to happen. There might be electricity, but there might not be electricity. These were two extremes, but it would push the development of hot air ballooning to a great extent. He clenched his fists and stared at the doomsday battery, looking forward to what would happen next. Everyone also looked at the doomsday battery curiously. They did not know what it was, nor did they know what it was used for. However, they were eager to know why Zhang Feng did not touch it himself. Why did he have to let others touch it? Was there something fishy going on? With these doubts, they looked at Zhang Sun, hoping to find an answer. Looking back, Zhang Sun rushed forward. With everyone's curiosity, he reached out to touch the iron rod. This is nothing. He stretched his hand back with a look of surprise and kept looking at it in front of his eyes, afraid that he would miss something. Originally, he thought that Feng Zi had some bad intentions and wanted him to touch this iron rod that no one wanted to touch. He was even prepared to get hurt. However, nothing happened. It seemed that Feng Zi was sincere in giving him a gift to rise to the heavens. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. He chuckled and said, "Feng Zi, don't forget about the ascension package you promised me." At this moment, Zhang Feng had no time to bother with him. He waved his hand and said, "Scram!" Then, he went straight to the doomsday battery and reached out his hand without hesitation. At this moment, he was stunned. Mother***Ker, was this all a scam? Why was there no voltage at all? Or was there a mistake in his operation? Did something happen? He froze on the spot and began to think. He carefully went through the production process again. However, there was no problem. What the F***CK? What was the problem? He was at a loss. He took out a cigarette from his waist and lit it up. He took a deep breath and slowly felt the stimulation of the smoke. At this moment, he seemed to have thought of something. A smile appeared on his face. He threw away the cigarette butt and looked at Zhang Sun. He hurriedly said, "Bug, take the copper wire from the bag and touch it again." "Why? I've already touched it. Unless you add another ascension package, I won't do it." Zhang Sun pouted and crossed his arms in front of his chest. He looked like he had Zhang Feng under control. Okay. I promise you." Zhang Feng pushed Zhang Sun and said impatiently, "Remember to take the copper wire in one hand and put the other end on the iron rod." He was in a hurry to complete the experiment. He could talk about ascending to heaven later. Okay. I'll do it right away." Zhang Sun Chong agreed and took the iron wire behind him. Then he stretched it toward the iron rod. From his point of view, there wasn't any danger just now, and there was nothing to worry about now. Wasn't it just a copper wire? What's the big deal? Thinking about it, he stretched the copper wire in his hand. Ah! At this moment, Zhang Sun Chong suddenly screamed and hurriedly threw away the copper wire in his hand. Seeing this, Zhang Feng could not help but smile. He rushed forward and grabbed Zhang Sun's hand. He asked anxiously, "Bug, how did you feel just now?" He saw at a glance that Zhang Sun had triggered the voltage. Otherwise, there would not be such a sudden reaction. Before Zhang Sun could answer, everyone surrounded him with concern and asked, "What's wrong? Bug, are you okay?" "Bug, what's wrong?" Although they usually did not like each other, they were still very friendly when there was danger. Chapter 18:23. "I'm fine. I just felt like I was bitten by something." Zhang Sun stretched out his right hand and showed it to everyone. He looked a little wronged. "Get out of the way. Isn't it just an electric shock? Why are you all crying?" Zhang Feng waved his hand and dismissed everyone. He was very clear that the voltage formed by the coal was very low. Even if it was touched, it would be fine. It was no different from static electricity. He glanced at the doomsday battery and couldn't help but feel happy. From the reaction of the bugs, the voltage seemed to be good. Now that the doomsday battery was created, they should be able to proceed to the next step. "Ma Zhou, Hao Chujun, we will immediately proceed to the next step of the experiment." Zhang Feng turned around and looked at Ma Zhou and the others. He said with a serious face, "Go and find a ceramic jar immediately. Fill it with 2/3 of water and paper. Remember, get some thick paper." "Yes, teacher." Ma Zhou nodded and walked out of the door with Hao Chujun. "Fengzi, why do we still need to do the experiment?" Chang Chumo protested. He didn't understand the use of the experiment and only wanted to go to heaven. "We are only halfway through. There is still half to go." Zhang Feng glanced at everyone and said casually. He now suspected that these guys were here to cause trouble and would jump out from time to say a few words. "Then our ascension." Zhang Sun Chong put on a despicable look and interjected from the side. "Don't worry, you won't be left out." Zhang Feng waved his hand and was a little impatient. That's good. Zhang Sun nodded and was secretly happy. He had just gone up to the experiment and earned 2 ascension packages. Naturally, he had to ask clearly. While they were talking, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun had already returned with the items. "Teacher, we have brought the items." Hao Chujun raised his hand to show the paper in his hand, while Ma Zhou hugged a jar of water. Zhang Feng nodded and pointed to the table beside him. "Put the jar on the table and pour 2 spoonfuls of salt into the water." "Yes, teacher." Ma Zhou put the jar on the table and poured in the remaining salt according to Zhang Feng's instructions. Then, nail 2 holes in the thick cardboard so that the copper wire can pass through. Then put it on the jar. Zhang Feng pointed to the cardboard on the side and said seriously. Now that there was no danger, he could leave it to the 2 students to operate and let them learn some knowledge. They did not disappoint Zhang Feng's expectations. Ma Zhou was operating at the side, while Hao Chujun was watching attentively. All that was left was the notebook to record. However, there was no need for that. They could not understand it at all. Zhang Feng just wanted them to slowly learn. "Teacher, everything is done. What should we do now?" Ma Zhou stopped what he was doing and asked seriously. "Now?" Zhang Feng glanced at the jar, then looked at Cheng Chumo and the other two and smiled. "Which one of you will do the next step?" He did not choose Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun to continue because these two guys were too thin and weak. Now that the electric current was unstable, what if something happened? Of course, there was also some psychology of protecting his children. Chen Tinyu and the other guys had thick skin and should be fine. However, his smile made Cheng Chumo and the other two feel uncomfortable. This was because the last time Feng Zi smiled like this, the worm was bitten by the copper wire. Now he was smiling again. Could it be that this brat was scheming something again? Their hearts were beating fast and their faces were full of reluctance. Although they did not know what danger it was definitely not something good. This was their unanimous evaluation of Feng Zi. This guy was not someone who would let himself be taken advantage of. "Why? You guys are not willing to come?" Zhang Feng smiled even more. In fact, he had already guessed what these guys were thinking. He just did not say it out loud. "Little guys, you want to fight with me?" The three of them hugged each other and shook their heads. Their faces were full of reluctance. It was as if they were saying that whoever wanted to go could go. Anyway, they were not going. "How about this? Whoever completes the next experiment will be rewarded with 3 ascensions. How about it?" Zhang Feng crossed his arms in front of his chest and revealed a complacent smile. He knew that these guys were the type of people who wouldn't act until they saw a rabbit. If he didn't give them some benefits, they wouldn't be willing to do things. 3 times? Du Go's eyes widened and he rushed forward. I'll go. How about that?" He could be said to be the most pitiful. Cheng Chumo had gone up to heaven once. Zhang Sunchong had received the benefits of going up to heaven twice. He was the only one who had nothing. He had to seize this opportunity. Although it might be dangerous, it was not life-threatening. He could do it. Da-bing, da-bing. Zhang Sun rushed forward and blocked in front of Du Go. "Da-bing, you can't go." Look at Feng Zi's smile. "This is not going to be easy. You will definitely get hurt. With your weak body, what if you become crippled?" Hearing this, Du Go was stunned. He glanced at Zhang Feng. Indeed, there was a hint of ill intent. Was he going to give up just like that? Chapter 1824. There was nothing wrong with Buggy going just now, but now he was not allowed to go. He hesitated and asked, "Then what do you think we should do?" "Sai, there's only one way. I'll go. I'll take care of everything for you. That way you won't be in danger." Zhang Sunchong let out a long sigh, speaking somewhat helplessly. Du Go frowned. So this kid was waiting for him here? "No, I'll go. I have to go." Du Go waved his hand and refused. Hey, I haven't even said anything yet and you two are already taking care of everything." Cheng Chumo stood out and spread his arms, showing the posture of a gangster. "Iron Bull, you've already King gone to heaven once. What are you fighting for?" Du Go was unhappy and glared. Although he was not as strong as Cheng Chumo, he was not willing to give in. "What you're saying is wrong. How can you take all the benefits for yourself? I've gone to heaven once, but it doesn't affect me fighting for the benefits." Cheng Chumo spread his arms and was not willing to give in. It seemed that this guy had completely inherited old Cheng's bandit style, using force to solve problems. "Alright, stop messing around." Zhang Feng stood out and waved his hand to stop the 3 from messing around. "Isn't it just an experiment? What are you guys messing around for?" As his voice fell, the 3 of them lowered their heads resentfully. It seemed that they were not satisfied, but now that Zhang Feng was the rich one, they did not dare to say anything. Even Cheng Chumo gave in. He nervously lowered his arms and looked at Zhang Feng with a look of dissatisfaction. "Feng, then you say, who will complete this step?" Cheng Chumo held his head high, looking very confident. "If you want me to say it." Zhang Feng swept his gaze over the crowd, and finally, his gaze landed on the person behind Du Go. He smiled faintly. "Du Go will do." All of you have already received benefits, but this fellow has nothing. As soon as he finished speaking, Dugo abruptly raised his head and stared straight at Zhang Feng. It was as if there was water swirling in his eyes. Feng Zi, thank you so much. Unlike these two fellows, they only know how to bully me. As he spoke, he glanced at Chang Chumo, Zhang Sun, and Chong Chong, who looked back at him with bitter eyes. All right, don't be jealous here. Get ready to start. Zhang Feng waved his hand and did not care about these details. To Bing, go and put the copper wire on the battery into the 2 holes that Ma Zhou drilled just now. Remember to put the copper wire into the water. Dugo frowned. He had just seen how painful it was for the insect to touch the copper wire. He was a little hesitant to touch it now. However, when he thought about how he could ascend to heaven after the experiment, the pain should be bearable. He made up his mind and slowly reached out his hand to grab the copper wire. At that moment, he felt the pain of an ant bite, which made him want to throw away the copper wire immediately. However, after thinking about it, he still put the copper wire straight into the hole until it was submerged in the water. Feng Zi, is it okay now? Dugo put down the copper wire and touched his slightly painful fingers. It's okay. You stand aside and rest first. Zhang Feng casually waved his hand, but his eyes were focused on the cardboard as if he could not move away. This was a ceramic jar, and the situation inside could not be seen clearly. He could only observe through the cardboard on the surface. Therefore, he did not dare to let his guard down. Teacher, what do we do now? Ma Zhou stepped forward and imitated Zhang Feng to stare at the cardboard. One word. Wait. Zhang Feng said faintly. Because the situation inside could not be seen, they could only determine whether hydrogen was produced based on the situation of the cardboard. If hydrogen was produced, there would be bubbles near the copper wire in the water. When the time came, these bubbles would push up the cardboard. This phenomenon could be seen from this phenomenon. Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun nodded as if they understood. This was the first time they had come into contact with this kind of thing. They could only listen to their teacher's instructions. Of course, they also wanted to learn some new knowledge from this. Chang Chumo and the other 2 also came over with a curious face. The 3 of them were not interested in this experiment at all. They even wanted this damn experiment to end as soon as possible so that they could continue to ride the hot air balloon. However, they could not help but be curious. After all, they were young people who were curious about new things. Everyone stared at the cardboard with a serious face. The laboratory was silent. It was so quiet that it was strange. Other than the sound of everyone's breathing, no other sound could be heard. After about half an hour, an exclamation sounded throughout the laboratory. It moved, it moved. Chang Chumo pointed at the cardboard and widened his eyes. It was as if he did not see it. Why are you quarreling? Zhang Feng slapped him and did not give him any face. Isn't it just moving? What's there to quarrel about? After that, he looked at Ma Zhou, who was in a daze. Go and get the silk and prepare to inflate it. Ma Zhou was a little late. He did not forget to glance at the cardboard before hurriedly running out of the door. After a while, Ma Zhou came back with the silk. He held the silk in his hand and panted. Teacher, the silk has been brought back. What should we do now? Chapter 18:25. Squeeze the inside of the silk first, and then buckle it on the jar. Remember to seal the mouth tightly when you take it out later. Zhang Feng reminded them again and again with a serious face. Now it could be said to be the last and most important step. As long as the hydrogen was successfully obtained, it meant that the experiment was successful, and then it could be promoted on a large scale. Yes, master. Ma Zhou nodded. He also heard the unquestionable tone in his master's voice and did not dare to slack off. Chu Jun, come and help. The 2 of them each pinched the edge of the silk and began to exert force on each other, trying to squeeze the air out of the silk. Of course, they did not know what air was. They just did what their master told them to do. It's done. Zhang Feng saw that it was almost time and quickly waved his hand to stop them. Now, put the silk on the jar. The 2 of them nodded, gently unfolded the silk and put it on the jar. Master, it's done. Hao Chujun tugged at this corner and said seriously. Well, next, Put your hands in and gently remove the cardboard. Then, after the time of a cigarette, seal the mouth of the silk. Zhang Feng stared at the silk and said with a serious face, "Remember to seal it tightly. It is best to tie it with a rope." The two of them nodded and continued to move their hands. They reached out and slowly removed the cardboard, following Zhang Feng's instructions. After waiting for almost the time of a cigarette, they slowly removed the silk. At this moment, they sped up, grabbed the vent, and tied it with a rope. "Master, it's done." Ma Zhou handed the silk in his hand to Zhang Feng. Zhang Feng took it with a happy face and played with it in his hand. He rubbed it from time to feel its softness. However, soon the smile on his face disappeared and was replaced by a touch of worry. The experiment had been completed, and the hydrogen gas had been collected. But how could they be sure that there was hydrogen gas inside? It was a colorless, transparent, odorless, tasteless gas that was difficult to dissolve in water. In this era without various facilities, there was no way to identify it. However, this thing had a big drawback, which was that it was highly flammable and very easy to burn. This was one of the reasons why the use of hydrogen was less. Flammability? Then could he test it with fire? In any case, there wasn't a lot of hydrogen inside, so there shouldn't be any danger. Moreover, this was the only way now. Otherwise, there really wasn't any way to identify whether this was hydrogen or not. Thinking of this, he tilted his head slightly and looked at Cheng Chumo beside him with a smile. "Feng Zi, what are you laughing at? Could it be that he's up to no good again?" Cheng Chumo crossed his arms like a resentful woman, afraid that others would take advantage of him. "Shoo, shoo, shoo. With your appearance, do you need to protect yourself so tightly? Why don't you take a piss and look in the mirror?" Zhang Feng pouted, but the smile remained on his face. "Now there's a good job. Whoever wants to do it will be rewarded." "What reward?" Upon hearing that there was a reward, the three of them scrambled to be the first, as if they were afraid of falling behind. "How about the benefits of ascension?" Zhang Feng raised a finger and smiled. "Just once." Cheng Chumo frowned and curled his lips. "Then forget it. Who do you think will go?" Clearly, he was a little traumatized by the experiment just now. Now, he wasn't willing to do anything unless there was something good. "I'll go." Dugo raised his hand high and glanced at everyone. "Isn't it just an experiment? What's so bad about it?" He wasn't worried that there would be any danger inside. After all, Feng Zi wouldn't harm him. "Good. De Bing is a real man. Unlike you guys." Zhang Feng stepped forward and patted Du Go's shoulder with a satisfied look on his face. "Feng Zi, what do you need me to do?" Du Go asked curiously. "Go light this match and place it at the vent of the silk." Zhang Feng revealed a meaningful smile. After speaking, he took out a match from his waist and handed it to Du Go. Du Go took the match and was a little puzzled. "Feng Zi, are you going to burn this silk?" "Of course not." Zhang Feng smiled and didn't explain. "You just need to do as I say." Du Go nodded. He didn't understand these things and didn't want to care. It was best to do as he was told. He opened the match and reached for the opening of the silk. Zhang Feng opened the opening. At this moment, a flame suddenly shot out, scaring Du Go so much that he hurriedly threw away the match and took 2 steps back. Seeing this, Zhang Feng quickly tightened the opening of the silk, afraid that a trace of hydrogen would leak out. He then looked at Du Go and asked with concern, "De Bing, how are you?" No matter what, he had sacrificed himself for the experiment. He should be concerned. However, this guy seemed to be frightened. He pointed at the silk and was speechless. "Feng Zi, this..." Du Go pointed at the silk, his face ugly. "It's fine. Don't panic." Zhang Feng casually comforted him with a satisfied look on his face. Chapter 1826. It seemed that his guess was correct. The hydrogen gas had been successfully collected. "Feng Zi, what exactly do you have in there?" Cheng Chumo scratched his head and looked at the silk in confusion. "You don't have to worry about that." Zhang Feng waved his hand and ignored the ignorant question. He then looked at Ma Zhou and said, "Ma Zhou, how Chu Jun? You two continue to collect according to the method just now." "Yes, master." The two of them answered in unison. They were actually a little confused, but seeing that their master was unwilling to explain, they did not ask. Then, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun began to experiment according to Zhang Feng's experiment. They were very serious. In order to prevent mistakes, Zhang Feng guided them from the side. After about half an hour, the silk was completely filled with hydrogen gas. However, hydrogen gas was lighter than air. Once it was filled, it would directly rise into the air. In order to prevent this, Zhang Feng, Ma Zhou, and Hao Chujun held onto the silk tightly, afraid that it would slip away. In the end, the three of them were clearly not heavy enough to hold down the hydrogen gas. The tips of their feet were floating. Tainyo, Debing, Buggy, hurry up and help. Zhang Feng held onto the silk with one hand and shouted at the three of them. There was no other way. The three of them were simply unable to suppress the hydrogen gas in the silk. They needed the help of these fat and thick guys. Oh, coming. Cheng Chumo responded carelessly. He could also see the seriousness of the matter. He went forward and grabbed a corner of the silk. In an instant, it floated down. It had to be said that these guys were really good at suppressing the weight. Zhang Sunchong and Du Go were not to be outdone. They went forward and used Monkey Hang's tree. The silk finally stopped rising and stabilized in the air. Feng Zi, what exactly is this thing? Why is it floating in the air? Du Go panted heavily and looked at the silk floating above his head with a puzzled expression. There is some gas in the silk. Even if I explain it to you, you won't understand. In any case, we will rely on this thing to ascend into the sky later. Zhang Feng used a hand to wipe the sweat on his forehead and casually explained. He wanted to let everyone know the importance of this thing. Otherwise, if the ignorant person suddenly let go, it would not be worth it. What? Is this a divine object that can reach the heavens? Zhang Sun exclaimed. He originally thought that this thing was not that important, but now it seemed that it was really amazing. No wonder Feng Zi treated it as a treasure. It turned out that it was a divine object that could reach the heavens. Thinking of this, he exerted more strength in his hand, as if he was ready to hold this thing tightly in his hand. The other two were the same. At first, they didn't care about this experiment, but now it seemed that this thing could actually pull people up. It was really not something ordinary things could compare with. No wonder it was said to be a divine object that could go to heaven. When they thought of going to heaven, the strength in their hands increased. With everyone's unrelenting efforts, silk finally showed no signs of flying up again. It remained in the air, motionless. Seeing this, Zhang Feng heaved a sigh of relief. However, it was impossible to keep holding on like this. He looked at Hao Chujun and said seriously, Hao Chujun, let go gently now and see if you can leave. Yes, teacher. Hao Chujun nodded and gently loosened his grip. At first, the silk didn't move, but the moment he loosened his grip, the silk rose slightly. Quick! Everyone press harder. Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd and hurriedly pressed down with force. In fact, even without Zhang Feng's reminder, everyone could feel the abnormality in their hands. They subconsciously exerted force together, and the silk suddenly sank down. Immediately, there were no signs of it floating up. Seeing this, Zhang Feng let out a long breath and turned to look at Hao Chujun. Hao Chujun, go get the green brick now. The sooner the better. Yes, teacher. Hao Chujun cupped his hands and turned to run out of the door. Feng Zi, what do you need the green brick for? Cheng Chumo asked curiously. He didn't dare to relax his grip at all. Without the green brick, how are you going to let go? Zhang Feng glanced at Cheng Chumo and said unhappily. You're right. Cheng Chumo chuckled. He didn't think too much about it. It was just that this thing was new to him. Zhang Feng did not pay any attention to this fellow. Instead, he raised his head and glanced at the silk. He could not help but marvel in his heart. Now, there were a total of 5 people, including himself, who were pulling the silk. Each person weighed a total of 150 kilograms. Ignoring Chen Tiniu's fat and thick body, there was a total of 750 kilograms. The hydrogen gas was actually able to withstand such a heavy weight. In other words, this hydrogen gas could easily carry 4 people into the sky. If it was light, it could even carry 5 people. He had to test it out later. Just as he was thinking, Hao Chu-jun brought 30 green bricks and stacked them under his feet. "Teacher, the green bricks are here. What do we do now?" Hao Chu-jun wiped the sweat off his forehead. It seemed that he was quite tired. Chapter 18:27. Tie these bricks with the hemp rope. Remember to connect them together. Don't separate them. Zhang Feng turned to look at Hao Chu-jun and said with a serious face, "Yes, master." Hao Chu-jun nodded and began to work. Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd and said, "Now, let go of the silk one by one. But don't let go of all of them. I'm going to tie the rope to the silk and connect it to the bricks later. Otherwise, no one will be able to let go. Do you understand?" "Yes, master." Ma Zhou nodded and said solemnly. The others also agreed. This was a divine object from heaven. They dared not neglect it. Otherwise, they would have no place to cry. Zhang Feng nodded with satisfaction and gently let go of his right hand. The silk swayed a little but did not float up. Seeing this, he took a rope from the table and began to wrap it around the silk. "Tainyo, gently let go of your right hand. When the rope is wrapped around, grab it again." Zhang Feng said seriously as he wrapped the rope around Chang Chumo's right hand. This guy liked to play around, so he had to be serious. "Okay, just do it." Chang Chumo nodded. He knew the seriousness of the matter and did not dare to be negligent. He gently let go of his right hand. The silk shook violently and was pulled down by everyone. Zhang Feng did not hesitate and slowly stretched out the rope. When everything was done, he said again, "Now, use your right hand to hold the silk and raise your left hand." Chang Chumo nodded and did the same thing again. Except for the violent shaking of the silk, nothing else happened. Then the rope successfully wrapped around Zhang Sun, Chong Chong, Du Go, Ma Zhou and the others. Zhang Feng grabbed the rope again and tied a knot. Everything was done. "Don't let go first. Let's tie the bricks first." Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd and then fixed his eyes on Hao Chu-jun. "Hao Chu-jun, tie the rope on the silk and the rope on the bricks. Remember, don't tie a dead knot." After saying that, he threw the hemp rope in his hand to Hao Chu-jun, indicating for him to tie the knot. Hao Chu-jun reached out and took the hemp rope. His movements were very nimble, and he quickly tied a knot. "Teacher, it's done." He raised his head and looked at Zhang Feng with respect. Zhang Feng nodded and glanced at the rope. After confirming that there was no problem, he let go of the rope first. Seeing that the silk didn't show any signs of floating, he looked at the crowd and said, "Everyone can let go now. Remember, let go one by one." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone began to loosen their grip. First, it was Chang Chumo. The silk shook slightly. Then, Zhang Sun also loosened his grip. The silk began to float, and the hemp rope began to tighten. Du Go and Ma Zhou both loosened their grip. The silk suddenly floated up, and the hemp rope became tighter and tighter. Only when the entire hemp rope straightened did the silk stop floating and float in the air. "Feng Zi, you're finally done with this thing, right?" Chang Chumo clapped his hands and looked at the silk above his head. "Well, it's basically done. We're just waiting for the experiment." Zhang Feng squinted his eyes and looked at the silk. He was happy. With this thing, the hot air balloon could be called a hot air balloon. "Can we experiment now?" Zhang Sun Chong rushed in front of Zhang Feng with a face full of joy. He was somewhat impatient. Chang Chumo had already ascended to heaven once, and it was just him and Du Go who could only watch. This was a bit unfair. Thinking about the benefits Zhang Feng owed him, he could not just let it go like this. The experiment must be done. "Why are you in such a hurry?" Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Zhang Sun and said unhappily, "Are you worried that I'll cheat you?" "That's not it. I'm just impatient." Zhang Sun scratched his head and smiled. Zhang Feng ignored this guy and stared at the silk in deep thought. There was no problem with the hydrogen now, but how to control the direction and height. The hot air balloons in the future used the gas in the ball to control the direction and height. However, there wasn't that much hydrogen now. Couldn't be used up. However, the height was often linked to the weight. Increasing the weight should be able to control the height. Once the height was controlled, the direction would be much easier. He kept thinking in his heart and finally decided. He then looked at Ma Zhou and said, Ma Zhou, go and find 10 bags. Fill each with 10 kilograms of sand and bring it to the field. Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun looked at each other. They were a little confused. They didn't know what their master was going to do, but they still answered and walked out. Tainyo, Bing, Buggy, do you want to go to heaven? Zhang Feng turned his head and looked at Cheng Chumo and the others with a faint smile. Of course. Feng Zi, you're willing to let us go to heaven? Cheng Chumo rushed forward and shook Zhang Feng's shoulder. Stop. If you shake me again, I'll die. Zhang Feng waved his hand and tried to stop this guy. Hee. Feng Zi, I'm sorry. Cheng Chumo laughed and rubbed his hands together. He looked at Zhang Feng with anticipation. Zhang Sun and Du Go also surrounded Zhang Feng and looked at him with anticipation. They were people who looked forward to going to heaven more than anyone else. Chapter 1828. Since you want to go to heaven, then do some work. Zhang Feng smiled, then pointed at the bricks on the ground. You guys move all these bricks to the field. Why do we still need to work? Zhang Sun was a little unhappy and spread out his hands. Yeah, Feng, why didn't you say that just now? Du Go was also a little conflicted. His body was thin and weak, so he didn't want to do such physical work. Moreover, these bricks weren't light. Each one weighed at least 5 kilograms. How could his small body bear it? You guys don't want to move? Zhang Feng revealed a mysterious smile. If you guys don't want to move, then don't go to heaven. With that, he pretended to turn around and walk out of the door. Before he turned around, he deliberately glanced at these guys. He knew that these guys were willing to do anything to go to heaven. Now, they wouldn't give up just like that. As expected, Cheng Chumo rushed forward and spread out his arms. It looked like he was going to block the way. Feng, those two are them. I didn't say I wouldn't move. I'll move. He revealed a silly smile and kept trying to curry favor. You want to move? Zhang Feng pretended to be surprised and asked. That's right, I want to move. Cheng Chumo nodded with a silly smile, then glared at Zhang Sun and Du Go. Those two guys can do whatever they want. I'm not with them. Okay, let's see if you can move it. Zhang Feng smiled faintly and looked at the pile of bricks. He couldn't help but complain for Tainyo. These bricks added up to about 700 kilograms. Let's see how this guy can move it. Cheng Chumo nodded excitedly, then rolled up his sleeves and walked towards the bricks. It looked like he was going to do something big. Seeing this, Zhang Sun and Du Go couldn't sit still anymore. They quickly went up and said, Feng, let's move too. Without waiting for Zhang Feng's reply, the two of them rolled up their sleeves and walked towards the brick. Both of them half-squatted beside Cheng Chumo, ready to exert their strength. However, how could this brick be lifted so easily? The three of them squatted on the ground, unable to exert any strength, and their faces turned red. This scene amused Zhang Feng. He smiled and said, Originally, I thought that you guys were very powerful. I wanted to train you guys and transport the silk. In the end, the three of you are so disappointing. You can't even move a few bricks. Feng Zi, who are you looking down on? Cheng Chumo raised his head and glared at Zhang Feng, looking as if he would not submit to anyone. If you have the ability, then move the green brick. That way you can go up to the sky. Zhang Feng snorted softly and crossed his arms in front of his chest, looking as if he was not convinced. Motherfucker. Cheng Chumo secretly spat. He glanced at his two fellow sufferers and shouted, Brothers, Feng Zi is looking down on us. Hurry up, then we can go up to the sky. Needless to say, Cheng Chumo's words had some effect. Zhang Sun's originally pale face instantly turned red. He pulled his hands on the brick and let go. Du Go was not bad either. His eyes were bloodshot, and the veins on his neck were bulging. Brothers, use your strength. Cheng Chumo supported himself with both hands and gritted his teeth. The roar resounded through the laboratory, and the black brick began to move slowly. Cheng Chumo took advantage of the opportunity to exert some strength, and Zhang Sun Chong and the other two put one hand on each side. The black brick was suddenly lifted up, and the three of them struggled to walk out of the door. The silk on top also moved. Slow down, slow down. Zhang Feng hurriedly stepped forward and waved his hand while guiding the three of them. This way, this way. Chang Chumo glanced at Zhang Feng and began to walk according to the other party's path. After all, with the brick in his hands, it was not very convenient to see the path. It was better to just follow the other party's instructions. Moreover, the brick was not light, making it difficult for them to walk. This way, this way. Zhang Feng continued to lead the way in front. He would look back every 2 steps. The three behind him were red in the face, and the veins on their necks were bulging. They clenched their teeth tightly and did not dare to say a word. They were afraid that when they spoke, they would give up and smash their own feet. After walking past the laboratory, the group finally arrived at the edge of the field. The path here was not easy to walk on. It was covered with the snow from last night. This made the three of them somewhat wobbly. Slow down, the path here is not easy to walk on. Zhang Feng glanced at the snow below his feet and hurriedly reminded everyone. The snow on the ground was slippery even for a person without any burden, let alone these 3 fellows who were carrying heavy objects. Although these 3 fellows had difficulty walking and were very careful, they did not slack off at all. At this moment, each of them seemed to have endless energy. It was unknown whether it was because they were close to the destination or because of the snow on the ground. Can't you King walk faster? Don't waste time? Chang Chumo straightened his neck and squeezed out a sentence from between his teeth. He had wanted to say this for a long time, but this guy was wasting time in front of him, if not for the fact that he had already arrived. Okay. Zhang Feng did not argue and repeatedly agreed. This guy still had something in his hands. What if he made a mistake and quit? Chapter 1829. Everyone unknowingly sped up. Other than the occasional slip, there were no major problems. Soon they arrived at the middle of the field. Chang Chumo could not wait to throw the green brick in his hand on the ground. As he threw it, the other 2 also dropped it. The green brick smashed a big hole in the snow. The 3 of them sat in the snow together and began to breathe heavily. Their faces were red, like strong cows that had just finished farm work. Are you guys okay? Zhang Feng glanced at the 3 of them and asked with concern. He did not want to tire them out just because of moving some things. Zhang Sun pointed at Zhang Feng, panting and unable to speak. Are you what? Zhang Feng looked at these guys and wanted to laugh. Are you deliberately tricking us? Chang Chumo patted his chest and finally said something normal. How am I tricking you guys? Zhang Feng spread his hands, indicating that he was innocent. Think about it. Without these things in the silk, how are you going to fly later? I'm asking you guys to move the things out first. Du Go frowned. There did not seem to be anything wrong with this. If they wanted to fly, they would need to use the things in the silk. Moving them out first would not be a problem. Forget it. I won't argue with you. He waved his hand casually and did not care so much. When do we start the experiment? Let me fly. As his voice fell, Chang Chumo and Zhang Sun also looked straight at Zhang Feng. Their eyes were full of anticipation, as if they were determined to get it. Right away. Aren't we waiting for Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun? Zhang Feng smiled and looked at the end of the field. After a while, 2 figures appeared in front of everyone. It was Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun. Each of them was carrying several sandbags in their hands. It was difficult for them to walk. Ma Zhou, Hao Chujun, you 2 brats, walk faster. Chang Chumo roared in the direction of Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun. He was in a hurry to ascend to heaven. He was waiting for these 2 fellows. How could he not be anxious? However, his roar didn't seem to have any effect. The 2 of them were still like old oxen pulling a cart, slowly walking in the snow. It wasn't entirely their fault. A sandbag weighed 10 pounds, and each of them carried 10. That was 100 pounds. In addition, they were weak scholars. How could they have the strength to carry the sandbags? That was why they walked so slowly. However, Chang Chumo didn't care about this. His eyes were wide open as he kept yelling, "You 2 brats, walk faster! Call your sister." Zhang Feng grabbed a handful of snow and threw it at Chang Chumo. Can't you see that they can't even lift the sandbags? If it's urgent, you can go and help. Why should I go? That's between the two of them. Chung Chumo snorted. He was a little unconvinced. Don't you want to ascend to heaven earlier? The sandbags in their hands are essential for heaven. Yes, yes. Zhang Feng smiled. He had put in a lot of effort to help Ma Zhou. Essential? Chung Chumo was a little surprised. He glanced at Ma Zhou and waved his hand. Let's go. After saying that, he suddenly got up and ran towards Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun. After resting for so long, his strength had almost recovered. Carrying a few sandbags wasn't a problem. Zhang Sunchong and Du Go saw that Chung Chumo had already gone. The two of them were embarrassed to stay where they were. Most importantly, they heard that these sandbags were essential for heaven. They needed to help. Otherwise, what would they do if they ran out of them? Although they didn't know what use they had, it was better than nothing. When Ma Zhou saw that Chung Chumo and the others came to help, he was overjoyed. He quickly handed over the sandbags in his hands. For Chung Chumo and the others, 5 kilograms was nothing. They quickly carried it on their shoulders and ran all the way over. Feng Zi, the things you wanted are here. Zhang Sun Chong threw the sandbags on the ground. He was a little out of breath. Zhang Feng didn't reply. Instead, he picked up a sandbag and weighed it. And the weight was about right. It should be around 5 kilograms. Ma Zhou, Hao Chujun, the two of you go and prepare the materials for the hot air balloon. Other than the brazier and coal, I want everything else. He looked at Ma Zhou and Du Go and began to instruct them on everything they needed. Yes, teacher. Ma Zhou nodded and began to prepare the materials. There were still materials left from the previous experiment. Therefore, they didn't need to take anything else. They could just use what they used last time. I'll go and help too. Du Go smiled and ran in front of Ma Zhou, ready to help. He wanted to learn. Maybe he could make a hot air balloon himself. Me too. Chung Chumo, Zhang Sunchong and Du Go seemed to have seen through Du Go's thoughts and also joined in. With these guys, the speed increased. Soon, the materials were gathered in less than a cigarette's time. Feng Zi, now that the things have been packed, can we start? Chung Chumo tilted his head and asked excitedly. Chapter 1830. And we can begin. Zhang Feng nodded his head, then looked at Ma Zhou. You two tie the iron wire to the silk, and tie the basket under the silk. Prepare to take off. Ma Zhou and Ma Zhou nodded their heads. They were already familiar with this task, and it was not difficult at all. They completed it quickly and efficiently. Teacher, it's done. Hao Chujun said as he held onto the iron wire. Zhang Feng nodded his head. He stepped forward and pulled on the iron wire. After confirming that there was no problem, he glanced at Chung Chumo and the others. You guys go on this basket. Also, try putting 5 sandbags on it. The sandbags were used to control the weight of the hot air balloon, making it easier to control the direction. Thus, they could not be careless. Okay, I'll be right there. Chung Chumo jumped up 3 feet high, and with a fierce jump, he jumped up. If the basket was not placed on the ground, he suspected that he would have smashed a hole in it. Let's go too. Du Go and Zhang Sun rushed up the basket as if they had gone crazy. They scrambled to be the first to reach the basket, as if they were afraid of falling behind. As soon as the 3 of them got on the basket, they were like curious babies. They kept jumping around the basket, as if they were testing whether the basket was sturdy or not. How could the poor rattan basket withstand the destruction of these 3 fellows? It let out a series of miserable cries. Motherf asterisk Kerr. What are you guys doing? Zhang Feng could not stand it anymore. He hurriedly stopped them, fearing that these fellows would break the basket. Feng Zi, we are just testing whether the basket is sturdy or not. Chung Chumo had a smile on his face, but his feet were still moving. Stop! Zhang Feng shouted loudly, somewhat annoyed. Even if the basket is sturdy, it will be ruined by you guys stepping on it so hard. Hearing this, everyone stopped and stood still. However, Zhang Feng's reprimand did not extinguish the enthusiasm in their hearts. Feng Zi, hurry up and start. I can't wait any longer. Chung Chumo rubbed his hands as a glint flashed across his eyes. Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Cheng Chumo and did not reply. Instead, he walked up to the basket and stood with the three of them. Then, he looked at Ma Zhou and the others. You guys check again. After confirming that there are no problems, untie the hemp rope tied to the green brick. The two of them nodded and began to check. They did not find any problems. Teacher, everything is normal. Hao Chujun replied with his head held high. All right, you can untie the ropes now. Zhang Feng nodded in satisfaction and placed his hand on the iron wire. Yes, teacher. Hao Chujun bent down and began to untie the hemp rope. Because it was a slip knot, the hemp rope was easily untied. The instant the lid was opened, the hot air balloon swayed slightly. Fortunately, it was on the ground. Otherwise, the four people in the basket might have staggered. The hot air balloon began to rise slowly. The speed was very slow, and one could feel the cold wind and chill in the air. It's rising. It's rising. Dugo waved his hands excitedly, as if he had never seen the world before. This was his first time in the sky. Everything in front of him was novel and beautiful. Of course, there was also a trace of pride. In the eyes of others, he was a famous playboy in the capital. He was ignorant and tyrannical. He only knew how to indulge in wine and women. Now, he had accomplished something that others could not. Although it was because of Feng Zi, it did not affect his pride at all. Of course, he was not the only one with such thoughts. Zhang Sunchong was leaning on the edge of the basket and pointing into the distance. Excitement was written all over his face. Yes, yes, look over there. Look at the ground. Ma Zhou and the others are like ants. Ha ha ha. Cheng Chumo lowered his head and looked down. He let out a burst of laughter and glanced at everyone from time to time. However, this feeling quickly disappeared because he remembered something. He was the first person in the sky. How could he be as ignorant as these guys? He clenched his right fist and put it to his mouth. He coughed twice and deliberately acted like a big brother. Can the two of you calm down? If I knew, I wouldn't have let you guys come up. As soon as his voice fell, a slap came. Why are you so noisy? Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Cheng Chumo. Aren't you afraid of breaking your teeth when you talk big? It was not his first time in a hot air balloon, so this thing was not novel at all. It was just that these guys were really annoying. Feng Zi, it's not like I'm the only one talking. Cheng Chumo rubbed his head and felt wronged. If they were on the ground, he might have already fought back. However, they were in the sky. Feng Zi was the only one here who knew about hot air balloons. If anything happened, everyone would be finished. Therefore, he did not dare to fight back. I know you're not the only one. Zhang Feng replied casually. Then, he looked at Zhang Sunchong and Ma Zhou. The two of you better behave. Don't make a fuss here. Otherwise, I'll throw you down later. After saying that, he did not look at the two's reaction. He sat in the basket and took out a cigarette from his waist. Just as he was about to take out a lighter to light it, he remembered that hydrogen was more flammable. He simply put down the cigarette and enjoyed the beautiful scenery in the sky. Chapter 1831. After being scolded by Zhang Feng, Zhang Sunchong and Du Go looked at each other embarrassedly and became more well-behaved. After all, Feng Zi was in charge of the hot air balloon and they didn't dare to disobey. However, they still couldn't help but feel happy. The two of them leaned on the edge of the basket and admired the beautiful scenery. They kept pointing there. After all, this was their first time in the sky and curiosity filled their whole body. Cheng Chumo was the same. He didn't succeed in showing off just now, so he could only lie on the side and admire the scenery. He was still fantasizing about how to show off in front of Li Chengqian and his dad. The hot air balloon was getting higher and higher, but because of the weight it rose relatively slowly. Beautiful scenery appeared in front of everyone's eyes. There was a green grassland underground, a mountain not far away, plum blossoms standing proudly in the snow, reindeer foraging for food, and so on. Look! There are reindeer on that mountain? Zhang Sunchong pointed at a mountain not far away and beamed with joy. Isn't that MTE? Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Zhang Sunchong and said in a bad mood. They just flew up from this mountain and these guys didn't recognize it in such a short time? Oh. Zhang Sun Chong scratched his head embarrassedly, causing everyone to burst into laughter. Okay, we've seen enough. Zhang Feng glanced at everyone and then looked at Chang Chumo. Tainyo, look down. If there's no one, throw a sandbag down. We should go back. He was a little hungry and needed to go down and eat something first. Feng Zi, don't be in such a hurry. Chang Chumo smiled and then looked at Zhang Sun Chong and Dugo. He deliberately winked at them. You see, it's still early. Why don't we go somewhere else? It was not easy for him last time, and he did not want to go down so easily. More importantly, he had not had enough fun and had not shown off enough. If he went to Chang'an with such a good thing, he would be able to show off. Most importantly, he would be able to gain face, and his reputation as a foppish playboy might be washed away. Zhang Sun Chong also understood and smiled in front of Zhang Feng. Yeah, Feng Zi, it's still early. Don't you want to play? For example, go to Chang'an City to see the scenery. Yeah, Chang'an City is now the most lively time. Don't you want others to see your hot air balloon? Sing praises of your talent? Dugo licked his face and tried to please Zhang's face because he wanted to go to Chang'an. As long as he was there, he could take the opportunity to show off and let others know that Chang'an's famousest playboy was better. You want to go to Chang'an? Zhang Feng looked at them with a faint smile. In fact, he had seen through their thoughts just now. Moreover, these guys were good at licking his boots and he enjoyed it very much. It wasn't that he couldn't go to Chang'an, but after experimenting for so long, his stomach was already bulging. Eating was more important. Of course. Chang Chumo smiled and said, Feng Zi, think about it. You made such a divine object. Wouldn't it be a pity if you don't go to Chang'an? Yeah, madman, don't you want to see the prosperity of Chang'an and let the people see your flying divine object? Zhang Sun Chumo rushed to the side and incited incessantly. Could be said that he wanted to go to Chang'an the most. He was a member of the royal family and didn't have any achievements. If he rode such a divine object to Chang'an, it would make Zhang Sun Chumo's family proud. Even his father could straighten his back when he entered the palace in the future. Go to Chang'an? Zhang Feng stroked his chin and showed a proud smile. Obviously, the words of these three people just now were very useful to him. Talent, merit, admiration of thousands of people. It was not impossible to go. He touched his growling belly and said with a wry smile, I also want to go, but my stomach is not living up to my expectations. After doing the experiment for so long, he had been hungry for a long time. If it weren't for waiting to go to heaven, he might have already eaten to his heart's content. Isn't it just hunger? Go to Chang'an. You can eat anything in Chang'an. Chang Chumo patted his chest generously, as if these were not a problem for him. Yeah, Feng Zi, think about it. You will have a lot of face in Chang'an, and if you ride such a divine object. Not to mention eating, won't you be able to choose the dragon liver and phoenix marrow in the palace? Zhang Sun Chumo was very good at adding fuel to the fire and kept inciting him. Yeah. Zhang Feng nodded. He was very happy with these guys' flattery. Okay, let's go to Chang'an and have a look. Mainly, he also wanted to go to Chang'an to have a look. Otherwise, these incitements would be useless. After all, he hadn't been there for a long time. Besides, since this hot air balloon was made, he had to open the eyes of the people. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but show a trace of pride on his face. He waved his hand and imitated the posture of Captain Jack. Set sail. Destination Chang'an. Okay. Seeing that Feng Zi was interested, Chang Chumo deliberately played along. He said with a smile, Captain, what should we do next? Stupid. Zhang Feng secretly spat. He pointed to the front and smiled. Of course, throw a sandbag to adjust the direction. Chapter 1832. As soon as he finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something and added, Remember to check if there's anyone. Don't smash anyone to death. Smash someone to death? Chang Chumo frowned and said in surprise, That can't be, right? A small sandbag can smash someone to death? Nonsense, of course it can smash someone to death. Zhang Feng slapped the back of Chang Chumo's head and said with a serious face, If you throw it from such a high place, even if you don't die, you will be seriously injured. He clearly remembered that in the future, there were many people who threw heavy objects from high up in the sky, implicating innocent passers-by and causing them to be smashed to death on the spot. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but curse the person who threw the heavy objects from high up in the sky. But it was different now. There was no such situation here. Thinking back, a person could be smashed to death from a height of more than 10 meters, not to mention a height of a few hundred meters. There was also a 5-kilogram sandbag. If it was thrown down and met someone, they would be smashed to death on the spot. That was why he was so serious. Chang Chumo saw Zhang Feng's serious face. Although he did not know why, he still did as he was told. After all, he still wanted to go to Chang'an to show off. He glanced down. The layers of clouds were somewhat unclear. After a while, the clouds dispersed. After confirming that there was no one, he threw down a sandbag. Fengzi, the sandbag has been thrown down. What do we do now? Chang Chumo asked with a happy face. One word, wait. Zhang Feng smiled and glanced at the beautiful scenery in the sky. Why do we have to wait? Zhang Xuan's face was a little ugly. It was not easy to persuade this guy to go to Chang'an. Now they had to wait? Don't we need you to control the direction for me? Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at everyone. Now the hot air balloon is slowly changing direction. With the wind, we should be able to float to Chang'an in a while. Okay. Whatever you say. Dugo repeatedly agreed. Right now, they could be said to be obedient to Zhang Feng's words. This was because Fengzi was the only person who knew about hot air balloons. Without this guy, how could they go to Chang'an? Zhang Feng was very satisfied with everyone's attitude. He sat in the basket and waited for the hot air balloon to float in the air. A cold wind blew, and the hot air balloon began to float in the direction of Chang'an. A group of ant-like people began to appear in front of everyone's eyes. Fengzi, look, what's that? Don't they look like ants? Zhang Sun pointed at the crowd on the ground. He was a little surprised. He had never seen such a scene and thought they were ants. Idiot, what are you talking about? That's just an ant. Chang Chumo slapped the back of Zhang Xuan's head. He spoke in a tone as if Zhang Feng was lecturing him. Chang Chumo was probably angered by Zhang Feng and wanted to vent his anger on Zhang Sun. I think you're all idiots. Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at everyone and said angrily, Those are people. We're about to reach the sky above Chang'an City. These are the people of Chang'an City. Chang Chumo's eyes widened in disbelief. Those are people? Why are they so small? Yeah, why do they look like ants? Fengzi, do you think we're easy to bully? Dugo glanced at the ground. His eyes were full of disbelief. In his knowledge, everyone was about the same size. Why did they look so small now? They were almost the size of an ant. You can only blame your ignorance. Zhang Feng glanced at everyone and put on a knowledgeable look. His face was full of pride. Have you heard of two children arguing? Chang Chumo frowned and nodded. Then, he seemed to think of something and shook his head. Have you heard of it? What do you mean by nodding and shaking your head? Zhang Feng was a little unhappy and frowned. I have never heard of it. Chang Chumo scratched his head and was a little embarrassed. I've heard of it. Zhang Sun smiled and glanced at Chang Chumo. He was quite proud. Then, he looked at Zhang Feng and asked, What does this have to do with two children arguing? It's the same principle as two children arguing. We're farther from the ground, so the people on the ground are smaller. The same principle applies to the people on the ground when they see us. Zhang Feng smiled. He wondered if these guys were uneducated. They didn't even understand such simple principles. Oh. Dugo nodded as if he understood. So that's how it is. You understand? Chang Chumo looked at Dugo with an evil smile. I understand. Isn't it because the things in the distance are smaller? Dugo's face was full of pride. It was as if he was talking about something very normal. But what he didn't see was that Chang Chumo and Zhang Sun had already come over with their fists raised. They were staring at him with dissatisfaction. I'll let you understand. You stinking brat. How dare you act cool in front of me? I'll beat you to death. You made me look bad. Dugo was caught off guard by the sudden punch and received it fiercely. The three of them wrestled together. However, fighting was also a daily routine for these fellows. If they didn't fight a few times a day, they would feel uncomfortable all over. Therefore, Zhang Feng didn't mind and happily watched from the side. He even clapped his hands and cheered. Chapter 1833. At the same time in Chang'an City. At this time, it was the busiest time in Chang'an City. The streets and alleys were filled with the sound of merchants soliciting customers. Manservants shuttled through the crowd. Peddlers walked and stopped with goods on their shoulders. Couples of men and women were choosing goods on the shelves. The whole of Chang'an was bustling with people coming and going. It was very lively. Zhu Zi was still hawking on the street with the fermented glutinous rice as usual. Fermented glutinous rice. Fermented glutinous rice. Just then, a roar came from behind. Zhu Zi. Oh, it's Huzi. Zhu Zi stopped and glanced behind him. Huzi held the load on his shoulder and quickly stepped forward to walk side by side with Zhu Zi. Zhu Zi, how's the business today? How else could it be? It's the same as usual. Zhu Zi smiled and patted the jar with his left hand. There was a hollow sound. Looks like you're doing well today. Huzi glanced at the jar and smiled. Do you want to take a break? Okay. Zhu Zi agreed without hesitation. Then, he glanced at the corner and said, let's go there to rest. After that, he walked to the corner with the load on his shoulder. Leaning against the corner, he put down the load. Huzi followed him closely. The two sat on the ground like this. Huzi wiped the sweat on his forehead and said with a smile, Zhu Zi, where's your fermented glutinous rice? Take it out and I'll exchange it with a steamed bun. After that, he lifted his clothes and fanned himself casually. His eyes drifted around and the sky from time to time. Suddenly, he seemed to find something. His eyes widened. He couldn't believe it, but he didn't know what it was. He just kept pointing at it with his finger. Huzi, here's your fermented glutinous rice. Zhu Zi handed over the fermented glutinous rice, only to find that Huzi was pointing at the sky. His eyes widened and his mouth kept muttering something. Huzi, what's wrong with you? Zhu Zi shook Huzi and asked with concern. What is that? Huzi was still pointing at the sky. His body was trembling and he couldn't speak clearly. Zhu Zi curiously glanced in the direction of Huzi's finger. If he didn't look, he wouldn't have known. But when he looked, he was shocked. His pupils shrank and his body trembled. Could it be an immortal? After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something. He hurriedly shook Huzi and shouted, Huzi, quickly put down your hand. You can't point. This is an immortal. If you continue to point, you will be punished by the heavens. Huzi, who was originally immersed in it, was suddenly awakened. He abruptly turned his head to look at the pillar, his body trembling. Yes. Immortal. After saying that, he hurriedly knelt on the ground and began to kowtow while muttering, Immortal, please forgive me. Immortal, please forgive me. When Zhu Zi saw this, he quickly followed Huzi's example and kowtowed on the ground. He even muttered the exact same words because in their knowledge only immortals could go to heaven. In other words, no one could go to heaven now. Those who could go to heaven must be immortals. After a series of kowtows, the blood on their foreheads was clearly visible. Probably feeling tired, the two of them stood up together and ran in different directions. They even abandoned the burden of eating while muttering incantations. I have to go home and tell my mother that an immortal has appeared. An immortal has appeared. The two of them kept shuttling back and forth in the crowd as if they were under a spell. Soon, someone noticed this abnormality. At the same time, they also heard what they said and couldn't help but wonder, immortal? There are immortals there? While speaking, this person intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the sky. Perhaps due to the influence of traditional thinking, they believed that immortals must be in the sky. However, at this moment he saw it. He saw what he thought was an immortal. Suddenly, his eyes widened. His brain seemed to have received an endless shock. He shouted crazily, In the sky! There are immortals in the sky! There are immortals in the sky! Quickly look! This roar instantly attracted the attention of the surrounding people. They glanced at this guy with some doubts. Immortals? How could it be? Lao Tzu had lived for decades and had never seen any immortals. Now you saw one? Most people held an attitude of disbelief. They thought that this guy was just crazy. Some people were even cursing in their hearts. However, there were still some curious people. They didn't believe in heresy. They couldn't help but shout in their hearts and look at the sky. Immortal? Is it really an immortal? Is that an immortal in the sky? Everyone quickly look. There are immortals in the sky. In an instant, everyone around them roared. They widened their eyes and pointed at the sky. Their faces were full of surprise and disbelief. The roars became louder and louder and spread farther and farther. The streets and alleys of the entire Chang and city began to shout non-stop. Some people even knelt on the ground and began to worship. This was because in their education, the immortals were the representatives of the heavens. Now that an immortal had appeared, how could they not worship him? On the upper floor of Chang and city, the soldiers also noticed this phenomenon. They looked at the sky together, their faces full of horror. They were soldiers. Logically speaking, they should only be in awe of this ghost. It was hard for them to believe. However, when they glanced at the people kneeling on the ground, their faith began to waver. Chapter 1834. What's going on? What's going on? Is there really an immortal in the sky? Shut up. How can we talk about this kind of thing? There was a lot of discussion. They even left their posts and gathered together to look at the sky. Surprise, uneasiness, and disbelief all shrouded them. What are you doing? A guard with a Tang sword at his waist strode out with a solemn face. He was followed by a team of 10 people, each holding a 3-edged bayonet and killing decisively. The guard's name was Shi Lian, the general of Chang'an City. He was resting in the city when someone reported that an unknown object had appeared in the sky. He specially came to check it out. It turned out that these people had gathered together to watch the fun. General, something happened in the sky. Seeing his superior coming, a guard quickly stepped forward, bowed, and pointed to the sky. Shi Lian frowned and glanced at the sky in the direction of the guard's finger. In an instant, he felt uneasy. What the hell is this? An immortal? His right hand, which was holding his saber, suddenly trembled. Fortunately, he was a military general and he quickly restrained himself. He glanced at the sky unwillingly. It was still the same feeling. It was unbelievable. There was actually something flying in the sky. He tried hard to suppress the horror in his heart. Holding the Tang sword tightly in his right hand, he asked in a trembling voice, "What is this?" Based on his soldier's intuition, the thing in the sky was definitely not simple. However, it was not necessarily an immortal because he could not believe it. "General, I don't know." However, the people in Chang'an City all said that it was an immortal. The guard lowered his body even more because the rumor came from Chang'an City. As the general of Chang'an City, he would be implicated if there was any problem. What? Shi Lian's pupils shrank. He pushed away the guard in front of him and walked quickly to the edge of the city wall. He saw groups of people shouting on Chang'an Street. Many people were pointing at the unknown object in the sky. Some had even knelt on the ground and kept praying. They were also calling for safety and an official career. Hurry up and comfort the people in Chang'an City. Try not to cause a disturbance." He raised his trembling right hand and pointed at the people on the ground, the muscles on his face twitching. This was Chang'an City. So many people were discussing and even kneeling down. If something happened, how was he going to explain it to his superiors? More importantly, this matter was related to immortals. If His Majesty the Emperor knew that so many people were kneeling down to an unknown object in the sky, he would be done for. "Yes, General." Everyone bowed in unison. All the guards did not dare to continue watching. They rushed down with Tang swords in their hands. They knew the severity of the matter. If more and more people gathered, it would be easy for people to die. In that case, it would be difficult for them to absolve themselves from the blame. Moreover, they only had respect for ghosts and gods. They did not believe in them or not. Bang, bang, bang. Sounds of footsteps could be heard coming from Chang'an City. The guards were lined up in a square formation with triangular bayonets in their hands. They looked at the crazy people in front of them with a serious face. A young man holding a Tang saber walked out from the group. "Everyone, listen up. Don't stay on the street. Go home immediately." The one who spoke was Sangfeng, the deputy general of Zhilian. He held a Tang saber in his hand and looked at the people in front of him with a serious face. It seemed that he would start a fight if there was a disagreement. However, his words did not have any effect. The people were still standing in the same place and discussing. Some of them were kneeling down as if they did not see him. "Everyone, listen up. Don't stay on the street. Go home immediately." Sangfeng was a little angry. He repeated it again. He decided that if the people did not go home, he would be ready to take coercive measures. The effect was minimal. The people did not pay attention to his words at all. It was as if they had gone crazy. The number of people kneeling down even rose sharply. "Men, get ready to force your way in." Sangfeng raised his right hand and gave the order. "Don't hurt the people. Just drive them home." "Yes." The people behind him answered in unison. Then they put the triangular bayonets in their hands on their waists and rushed out. "What are you doing? Stop it. Why are you stopping me from kneeling down to the immortal?" The attack of the crowd immediately caused a fierce response from the people. They used their bodies as shields and started to resist the soldiers. Due to the large number of people, the soldiers were actually at a disadvantage. In addition, without orders, they did not dare to harm the people. Gradually, the situation began to deteriorate. On the city tower, Zhilian looked at all this. He clenched his right fist and cold sweat flowed down his forehead. He had a bad feeling. The people were gathering and kowtowing on the ground. If this went on for too long, it would definitely cause a mutiny. It seemed that he had to inform the High Duke. Thinking of this, he slammed his palm on the brick. He glanced at the people and soldiers in the chaotic battle unwillingly and left with a flick of his sleeves. "Prepare the horse. Let's go to High Duke Lu's residence." With that, he quickly walked down the city tower. The horse downstairs was already prepared. Zhilian jumped on the horse and rushed to High Duke Lu's residence. Chapter 1835. "Get out of the way! Get out of the way!" He glared and roared at the front while waving the horsewhip in his hand. Although the crowd was in a frenzy, they were not unafraid of death. Seeing the horse galloping, they knew he was not someone to be trifled with, so they made way for him. 30 minutes later, Zhilian arrived at High Duke Lu's residence. "Quick! Report to High Duke Lu that something big has happened." Zhilian roared at the servant at the door before he even got off his horse. In his opinion, this matter had already reached a point where it could not be delayed. The servant's expression changed. He knew something must have happened, so he rushed into the residence. Whoosh! Zhilian reined in the horse, dismounted, and jumped into the Chung residence. Just as he entered the door, he heard an unhappy roar. "Is it that bastard? How dare he disturb Lao Tzu for no reason?" The voice belonged to Chung Yaojin. He strode to the door and bumped into Zhilian. He frowned and said, "It's you, little bastard. Why are you here instead of guarding the gate of Chang'an City?" "Something big has happened, High Duke." Zhilian panted heavily as he looked at Chung Yaojin with a serious expression. "Damn it, what big thing can it be? Could it be that the sky has collapsed?" Chung Yaojin was dissatisfied. He was practicing martial arts at home but was disturbed by this brat. How could he not be angry? "High Duke, please calm down first." Zhilian swallowed and tried to moisten his dry throat. He grabbed Chung Yaojin's left hand and pointed to the sky. "High Duke, look at the sky." "What is that?" "The sky." Chung Yaojin frowned and was puzzled. "What are you up to now?" Although his mouth was unforgiving, he knew that Zhilian wouldn't dare to lie to him. Perhaps there really was something up in the sky. He still glanced at the sky, and this glance instantly made him feel unwell. What is this?" Chung Yaojin raised his right hand and stared at the sky. "Duke, I don't know either." Zhilian pulled a long face and said helplessly, "Now, the people in Chang'an City are all saying that the thing in the sky is a deity. They are all kneeling and praying to it. What did you say? Chang Yaojin's strong body suddenly trembled, and he slapped him backhandedly. He glared at him and said, "Why don't you stop the people of Chang'an City from worshipping this thing?" He had spent his entire life on the battlefield and didn't believe in ghosts and gods. He also didn't allow his subordinates to believe in such things. Today, Si Lian actually did something like this. "Duke, you can't blame me for this." Si Lian touched his burning cheeks and felt a little wronged. "You know that I'm your soldier and I never believe in these things. But the people of Chang'an City don't listen. They keep talking about it on Chang'an Avenue. Some of them have even knelt down to worship you. Then what are you waiting for? Take my waist token and borrow soldiers from the big hay." Chang Yaojin looked as if he expected better from Si Lian. He took out a waist token from his waist and threw it to Si Lian. "Go and find the big hay immediately. I have to go to the palace to discuss this with His Majesty." After that, he didn't wait for Si Lian to reply and directly walked to the door. He said while walking, "Chang'e, prepare a horse to go to the palace." When he arrived at the door, the horse was already prepared. Chang Yaojin jumped on the horse and rode with the long whip in his hand. He was heading to the palace. "Get out of the way. Get out of the way for Lao Tzu." He kept waving the long whip in his hand to drive away the people who blocked his way. The people were originally people who bullied the kind and feared the evil. When they saw this guy who looked like a bandit, they all made way. In the time it took to burn a stick of incense, Chang Yaojin arrived at the palace. Whoosh! Chang Yaojin pulled the reins of the horse, jumped off and rushed to the palace. "Hi, Duke! What are you doing?" The guard went up and stopped Chang Yaojin without saying anything. If it was someone else who barged into the palace, they might have been decapitated. However, it was the High Duke, so he could only treat him with respect. "Get out of the way. I have something important to discuss with His Majesty." Chang Yaojin didn't talk nonsense with the guard and directly rushed to the palace. "High Duke, please don't make things difficult for me." The guard's expression was ugly. Guarding the palace gate was his responsibility. He didn't dare to let Chang Yaojin in. At the very least, there had to be an announcement. "Get out of the way." Chang Yaojin slapped the guard's face with dissatisfaction. The guard immediately fell down and staggered twice. He didn't dare to say anything. Chang Yaojin snorted coldly and walked to the palace gate. The other guards naturally didn't dare to stop him. They all knew how powerful Chang Yaojin was. Moreover, he seemed to be especially angry today. He had just taught a guard a lesson. How could they dare to stop him? He took large strides to the imperial study. Along the way, he didn't dare to slack off at all. "Hi, Duke Lu. Where are you going?" The sound of a male duck came from behind. Chang Yaojin glanced behind him. The one who spoke was Xiao Gizi. "Xiao Gizi, why are you here? Where is His Majesty?" Chang Yaojin stopped and asked with a serious face. "High Duke, His Majesty is in the imperial study." Xiao Gizi bowed and used the sound of a male duck. "Okay, lead the way. I want to see His Majesty immediately." Chapter 1836. Chang Yaojin grabbed little Gizi and rushed to the imperial study. He could not wait any longer. "Duke, slow down, slow down." Little Gizi was trembling as he was being pulled, but he could not refuse the Duke's good intentions. He felt uncomfortable all over. "Slow down? Hurry up." Chang Yaojin did not care about this. He carried little Gizi and did not slow down. Now that they were in the palace and he was the one who broke into the palace, it was much easier to move around with this guy. Sure enough, with little Gizi, many patrolling guards did not come forward to ask questions. They were unimpeded all the way. Soon, the two of them arrived at the imperial study. Little Gizi was a little out of breath. "Duke, you can go in by yourself." Chang Yaojin did not say anything and strode directly into the imperial study. He saw Li Shimin leaning over the desk and reading memorials. He had a cigarette in his left hand and took a puff from time to time. He looked very comfortable. "Your Majesty, something big has happened." Chang Yaojin quickly stepped forward and bowed. Li Shimin, who was reading memorials, suddenly raised his head and glanced at Chang Yaojin. He was a little confused. Why was this guy here? He did not summon him, but this was not important. He did not care and said seriously, "Why are you here? Your Majesty, something big has happened in Chang'an." An unidentified flying object appeared in the sky above Chang'an city. Now the people regard this object as a god and have even started to worship it. Chang Yaojin looked anxious and began to pace on the spot. "What?" Li Shimin threw down the brush in his hand and his eyes widened. "What is this unidentified flying object you are talking about?" "Your Majesty, I don't know either." Chang Yaojin spread his hands and said helplessly, "I just took a look. I don't know what it is exactly." "Is the thing you are talking about still in the sky?" Li Shimin quickly walked down from the desk and looked at Chang Yaojin with a serious face. "They should still be in the sky. I saw them on my way here." Chang Yaojin glanced at the beam and his expression turned ugly. "Then what are you waiting for? Come with me and take a look." Li Shimin hurriedly finished and strode out of the door. From time to time, he would take 2 puffs of the cigarette in his hand. He seemed a little anxious. His steps were very big. In a moment he arrived at the door. When he looked up, his pupils instantly shrank. He could not help but be stunned in place. For a moment he did not know what to say. What was that in the sky? How could something fly in the sky? This was impossible. How could such an absurd thing happen? However, such a reality was happening right in front of his eyes. Could it really be as Chang Yaojin said, that he was an immortal? No, impossible. He had been fighting for several years and killed countless people, but he had never seen any immortals. Even demons and ghosts had to retreat. How could it be possible today? Not an immortal? Could it be a human? Was that guy playing tricks in the sky? It should be known that kites could also fly in the sky. It was not impossible for someone to make some huge kites to fly in the sky. However, this statement was soon overturned by him because no known kites could fly so high, let alone such a big one. It was completely impossible. Then what could it be? Could it be that God was dissatisfied with the Tang dynasty? Or was there any revelation? Thousands of thoughts were constantly breeding in his mind, but he just could not figure it out. At this time, a tingling pain came from between his fingers, which awakened him from his endless thoughts. He looked down and saw that the cigarette was about to burn out. He frowned and seemed to think of something. He quickly said to Xiao Gizi, "Quickly summon Imperial Astronomer Xu Jindo, Yuan Tiangang, Wei Zheng, Zhang Sun Wuji, Fang Xinling, Du Ruhui, and others to come to the palace to see me immediately." "Yes, Your Majesty." Xiao Gizi bowed and quickly turned to leave. As the emperor's personal eunuch, he naturally knew the importance of this matter. The appearance of an unknown object in the sky was a major event in the Tang dynasty. He did not dare to neglect it. Thinking of this, he walked faster, lowered his head tightly, and ignored the many things in front of him. Ah! A solid object hit him head-on, which made Xiao Gizi feel a little pain. He bared his teeth and was about to curse, but when he looked up, he was surprised. It was none other than Imperial Astronomer Xu Jindo, who was appointed by His Majesty. "Lord Xu, you came at the right time. His Majesty is summoning you. Come with me to see him." While speaking, Xiao Gizi also glanced behind Xu Jindo and found that Du Ruhui, Fang Xinling, and others were also there. He was so happy that he kept saluting. "It turns out that Mr. Du and Lord Fang are also here. His Majesty is summoning you. Hurry up and see him. His Majesty can't wait." "Good, good, good. Eunuch, please lead the way." Xu Jindo did not dawdle and walked straight to the imperial study. He did not know why His Majesty summoned him in such a hurry, but he had something important to report to His Majesty. Generally speaking, the armillary sky supervisor did not enter the palace except to observe the astronomical phenomena and calculate the solar terms. But today he found an extremely strange thing. An unknown flying object actually appeared in the sky. This was very rare in the history of dynasties. Even if it did, it was a sign that the country was going to change. But today, such a thing actually happened in the Tang dynasty. This made his whole heart hang in the air, and he did not dare to let it go. Chapter 1837. Of course, he was not the only one with this idea. Yuan Tiangang and Li Chunfeng were also the first to discover this matter. They found Xu Jindo immediately. The three of them calculated together, but none of them made sense, so they decided to go to the palace together. On the way, they met Du Ruhui, Fang Xianling, and others, so they went to the palace together. Although they were old, they did not slow down. In less than a moment, they arrived in front of Li Shimin. "Your Majesty, your humble servant." Everyone bowed in unison, but their faces were gloomy. In their eyes, they were also the backbone of the Tang dynasty. They should be loyal to the emperor. But today, they failed to see through the mystery in the sky. It was really a shame. "You don't have to be so courteous," Li Shimin replied casually. Then he pointed to the sky and frowned. "Dear ministers, please look. What is this thing in the sky? Do you know?" "Your Majesty, please stop." Xu Jindo hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed Li Shimin's right hand. His face was a little ugly. "Your Majesty, now it is said that the thing in the sky is an immortal. I'm afraid that such behavior will be disrespectful to immortals." Immortals? Li Shimin was a little unhappy. He did not believe in these things. At most, he was in awe. But this guy said the same thing. He really did not know how to talk. "Do you think it is an immortal?" "Well," Xu Jindo glanced at the unknown object in the sky and did not know how to answer. If he did not believe it, he was a person who observed the astronomical phenomena and calculated the solar terms. He was still a little sensitive to these unpredictable things. If he believed it, His Majesty seemed to be a little dissatisfied. This was difficult for him. "Your Majesty, I don't think we should come to a conclusion so early." Wei Zheng stepped forward, stroked his beard, and said seriously, "Oh." Li Shimin looked at Wei Zheng and asked in confusion, "Why do you say that?" He was more optimistic about Wei Zheng, not because the latter often advised him or was loyal, but because he could often find the key to the problem and hit the nail on the head. "Your Majesty." Wei Zheng bowed and glanced at the sky. Then, he said seriously, "Your Majesty, I don't think it's urgent to figure out what the thing in the sky is, but to appease the people first. The people are ignorant. If such a thing appears, they will definitely regard it as a divine object and rush to worship it. On my way here, I saw that Chang'an city was in chaos. Countless people were kneeling on the ground, calling it an immortal and worshipping it wantonly. If this goes on, I'm afraid it will cause a commotion or even a mutiny." He deliberately emphasized the word mutiny and glanced at Chang Yaojin while speaking. Because the Chang'an city gate was under the control of Chang Yaojin's subordinates. Now that something had happened, Chang Yaojin could not get away with it. Chang Yaojin seemed to have felt the cold gaze as well. His old face darkened, and he immediately jumped out. "Wei Zheng, who are you scolding in a roundabout way? If you have the guts, let's go to the martial arts practice field to practice. Don't stab Lao Tzu in the back." "Jijia." Li Shimin shouted and stared at Chang Yaojin with a pair of tiger-like eyes. "What are you doing? This is the palace, not your home. You are not allowed to make trouble here." "Your Majesty, please forgive me." Chang Yaojin quickly stepped back and pointed at Wei Zheng with a fierce face. "It's this old." Halfway through his words, he saw that Li Shimin's eyes were a little dissatisfied. He cupped his hands repeatedly. He was not afraid of anything, but he was afraid of Li Shimin. "Stop talking. Let me ask you, what's the situation in Chang'an city?" Li Shimin waved his hand, as if he did not want to listen to Chang Yaojin's explanation. Instead, he directly asked about the situation in Chang'an city. "Your Majesty, this?" Chang Yaojin cupped his hands, and his face was a little ugly. "What is this? I want to hear the current situation in Chang'an city from you." Li Shimin stared at Chang Yaojin and said sternly, "Chang'an city was the heart of the Tang dynasty and the lifeline of the world. It was the place he cared about the most. If it were not for Wei Zheng's advice, he would not have known the situation until now." This guy was still unwilling to talk about it? "Your Majesty, when the unidentified object appeared earlier, there was indeed a commotion in Chang'an city. Fortunately, I have stopped it." Chang Yaojin bowed and said in a trembling voice, "I'm afraid not." Wei Zheng looked at him coldly and said with cupped hands, Your Majesty, as far as I know, there is a commotion in Chang'an City now. The guards guarding the city can't stop it. There are signs of people passing on. After that, he waved his sleeve and coldly glanced at Chang Yaojin. Of course, he did not deliberately target Chang Yaojin. He just felt that when such a big thing happened, how could Chang Yaojin, a duke, stop it? Instead, he made things worse. He was really ashamed to face His Majesty and the Tang dynasty. Wei Zheng, don't talk nonsense here. Who said I didn't stop it? Chang Yaojin stared and pointed at Wei Zheng, very dissatisfied. Chang Yaojin, shut up. Li Shimin did not shout Jijia this time. He was really angry. He took a long breath and said coldly, "Did you stop the commotion in Chang'an City or not?" Chapter 1838. Your Majesty. Chang Yaojin glared at Wei Zheng and then slowly looked away. I have informed Big He on my way here. He has led the army to Chang'an City to suppress the people. I believe that in less than half an hour, there will be immediate results. Hearing this, Li Shimin's frowning brows relaxed. He knew Yu Qigong's ability very well. He had always been famous for his bravery and fighting. Since he followed him to lead the army, he rarely lost. It should be no problem for him to suppress some people. Since Jingda has already rushed to Chang'an City, I believe there will be no problem. Now let's talk about the matter at hand. What is the thing in the sky? He glanced at the crowd, and his face was full of worry. To be honest, he really didn't want to believe that the thing in the sky was the manifestation of immortals. However, all the signs made him have to believe it. It was really a little worrying. Your Majesty. Fang Xianling stepped forward with his hands folded. He glanced at the thing in the sky and said slowly, Your Majesty, Shu Jindo, Master Yuan, and Master Li of the Imperial Astronomer are all here. Why don't you let them do a divination to find out the mysteries of heaven? Yes, how could I forget these three? Li Shimin's face showed a trace of joy. Then, he glanced at the three people who stood out among the crowd. Why did they stand out among the crowd? It was because they were all wearing Taoist robes. There was a faint temperament of Taoist masters emerging. The three of you, please do a divination for the Tang dynasty. What is the thing in the sky? In fact, they had already done a divination before coming to the palace. They had even asked Shu Jindo of the Imperial Astronomer to do a divination together. The three of them did a divination together, but they didn't find any mysteries of heaven or anything. That was why they came to the palace to discuss with His Majesty. However, as soon as they came, they were temporarily delayed because of the matter in Chang'an City. During this period, he secretly did a divination in his sleeve, but he didn't find anything. Now, His Majesty asked him to do a divination. If he couldn't find out the thing in the sky, wouldn't he ruin his reputation? And he would be guilty of deceiving the emperor? However, he couldn't refuse the emperor's request. Otherwise, it would be a crime of disobedience. It seemed that he had no choice but to bite the bullet. Thinking of this, he formed a seal with his right hand and bowed. Yes, Your Majesty. However, you must prepare incense tables, candlesticks, and other sacrificial items. These are all trivial matters. Taoist priest, please do it quickly. Li Shimin readily agreed. Then, he looked at little Gizi who was on standby. Little Gizi, immediately send someone to prepare the incense table and candlesticks. It must be quick. Yes, Your Majesty. Little Gizi bowed and turned to leave. In less than a quarter of an hour, Xiao Gizi leisurely walked over with a few eunuchs, holding incense, candles, yellow paper, and other sacrificial items. The imperial palace often held sacrificial ceremonies, so these things were necessary and not difficult to find. The incense table was neatly arranged under Xiao Gizi's direction, and the candlesticks and yellow paper were also neatly arranged. The three of you, can we begin now? Li Shimin glanced at Yuan Tiangang and others and asked eagerly. Yuan Tiangang didn't answer. Instead, he looked up at the unidentified flying object in the sky. After about 2 or 3 seconds, he frowned and said, Your Majesty, we can begin. After that, he turned to look at Li Chunfeng and others behind him and said helplessly, Chunfeng, Jindo, let's do the divination together. The two nodded and didn't speak because they knew that it was useless to say anything now. Only the divination would know the truth. Although there was no result just now, they might be able to get a glimpse now. With such a lucky thought, the three of them walked to the incense table with seals in their hands. Yuan Tiangang stood in the middle, picked up the wooden sword on the incense table, and stood in front of him. Then, he formed a seal with his left hand and glanced at the two people on his left and right. Chunfeng, Jindo, raised the sword. Let's start together. The two of them understood, so they didn't need to say anything. They nodded and grabbed the wooden sword. After looking at each other, the three of them closed their eyes and began to chant. Wearing a canopy on the head, walking on Kuegong, supporting Liujia on the left, Luding on the right, Luding on the front, Luding on the back. As soon as the voice fell, the three of them opened their eyes. At this moment, their eyes seemed to emit a light that couldn't be seen clearly or touched. Then they began to wave the wooden sword in their hands. First it was up and then down. It seemed to be disorderly, but in fact it contained the universe. The 9 luminaries move forward, the beginning of the origin lingers, the essence of the flower responds to the brightness, the original spirit scatters, the endless flow of hope descends upon me. The glory of Zhu Jing, the stagnation is lifted, the red clouds rise, the purple star rises, all things in the world, let me be a prophet. The three of them put the seal in their left hands to the tip of their noses and urged the incantation with a serious face. At this moment, they seemed to have entered a state of selflessness. Everything around them had nothing to do with them. The people behind them looked at this scene and didn't feel surprised because it wasn't the first time they had seen it. Every time the royal family offered sacrifices, they would let the official office of the imperial astronomer do it. Sometimes they would invite Yuan Tiangang, Li Chunfeng, and others. Chapter 1839. Although they were used to these things, they still had some repulsion in their hearts. Ghosts and gods were mysterious and unpredictable. How could they be seen through so simply by reciting a few spells? Especially Chang Yaojin, he was even more disgusted with these things. He even put his hands up and was ready to watch a good show. He was a soldier and had killed more people than the people of Chang and City. If there were really ghosts and gods, why didn't they come to take his life? Of course, he only belonged to the kind of people who didn't believe in ghosts and gods. But he didn't dare to be disrespectful to ghosts and gods because there had been sacrificial activities since ancient times. These acts of praying for people's blessings were originally good intentions. They could not believe in them, but they could not be destroyed. Otherwise, they would become the public enemy of the entire Tang dynasty, which was not something a duke could bear. Li Shimin didn't know these different thoughts of the people. At this time, he clenched his fists and opened his eyes wide. It seemed that he wanted to see something from such a ceremony, but unfortunately, he saw nothing. In fact, he also belonged to the kind of people who didn't believe in ghosts and gods. What immortals! If these immortals really exist, why did the people of the Tang dynasty suffer so much? Thinking of the Turks who killed the people of the Tang dynasty for fun a few years ago, he was full of doubts about the immortals. However, he was not only Li Shimin, but also the emperor of the Tang dynasty. When such a strange thing appeared, people couldn't go to heaven to check it. They could only hope for ghosts and gods, so they invited Yuan Tiangang and others. Otherwise, how could they know the truth? There was no other way. Only by figuring out what it was could he give the people an answer and appease the restless people. Otherwise, how could he face the people of the Tang dynasty in the future? Thinking of this, Li Shimin's face showed the sadness again. He subconsciously took out a cigarette from his waist and stretched out his slightly trembling right hand to touch the fire roll, but he didn't feel anything. At this time, Xiao Gizi hurriedly took out a match from his waist and handed it over respectfully. He was His Majesty's personal eunuch, so it was necessary for him to have sharp eyes. Ever since he knew His Majesty liked this, the match at his waist had never been broken. Li Shimin glanced at little Gizi out of the corner of his eye and nodded slightly. He stretched out the cigarette, lit it slowly, and took a deep breath. This relieved his tight nerves. After relaxing for a while, he turned his eyes again to Yuan Tiangang and others who were doing the ritual. Yuan Tiangang and the other two had adjusted the posture of the wooden swords in their hands, but they still kept chanting. Heaven and earth are natural, the filthy air is dispersed, the mysterious void in the cave, the dazzling Taiyuan, the mighty gods from all directions, make me natural, the talisman of Lingbao, announced to the 9 heavens. As soon as he finished speaking, he glanced at Li Chunfeng and Xu Jindo and said solemnly, "Take them." The 3 of them took a long breath and put the long swords on the incense table. Yuan Tiangang took out 3 copper coins from his sleeve and threw them on the incense table. He put his palms together and murmured. After a quarter of an hour, he slowly opened his eyes and looked at the copper wire. How could this be? Yuan Tiangong's pupils shrank, and his brows were almost knitted together. Li Chunfeng and Xu Jindo were the same. They were in disbelief, as if this divination wasn't done by them. "The 3 of you, what happened?" Li Shimin noticed the abnormality and quickly stepped forward. He glanced at the copper coins on the incense table, but he couldn't understand them at all. He had to look at Li Chunfeng and others and asked, "Taoist? How do you explain this divination?" No one answered. The 3 of them stared at the copper coins as if they didn't hear Li Shimin. They weren't pretending not to hear him, nor were they purposely not answering. It was because of this divination. This divination was really strange. Usually, no matter what happened, Yuan Tiangang was alone. Even if he didn't know everything, he could still get a glimpse of the big picture. There was also Li Chunfeng, whose cultivation was not lower than Yuan Tiangong's. The 2 of them were teachers and friends. When they worked together, there had never been a divination that they couldn't solve, let alone the half-baked Xu Jindo. However, when the 3 of them worked together today, the divination couldn't be solved. There was no reason for it. It was as if the things in the sky came out of nowhere and had nothing to do with ghosts or gods. Strange, very strange. Li Chunfeng frowned. At this moment, he wasn't in the mood to study whether there was a problem with his Taoist technique. He was focused on this divination. "Taoist Li, why do you say so?" Li Shimin saw that Li Chunfeng was the only one who spoke, so he had to ask this unlucky guy. "Your Majesty, there's something you don't know." Li Chunfeng glanced at Li Shimin and didn't salute. Maybe it was because he only thought of him as a beggar, or maybe it was because he was so immersed in the divination that he had completely forgotten. "Your Majesty, in the past, Tiangang and I have always divined things clearly. Today, with Brother Jindo, there should be no problem. However, there was a mistake. Not only did we fail to divine what is in the sky, but we also failed to divine the cause. This is really strange." As he spoke, he intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the object in the sky, and his eyes were filled with curiosity and bewilderment. He thought to himself, "If I know what it is, I'll definitely study it for 7 days and 7 nights before I stop." Chapter 1840. However, he didn't see Li Shimin's lonely eyes. It seemed that the hope in his heart had been shattered. How could this be? Li Shimin's hands trembled a little. He glanced at the 3 people and said, "Even the 3 of you can't figure out what this is? Then who else in the Tang dynasty can know?" "Your Majesty, don't panic." Yuan Tiangang hurriedly stepped forward and held Li Shimin. "Your Majesty, although we didn't figure out what this is, we feel that it is an ominous sign." "What do you mean?" Zhang Sun Wuji stepped forward and took Yuan Tiangong's right hand. He was a little surprised. At the emperor's side, he could be said to be the most loyal subordinate because the current empress was his sister, and the emperor was his brother-in-law. Zhang Sun Wuji's family had invested in the Tang dynasty. Now Yuan Tiangang suddenly said that it was an ominous sign. Didn't that mean that the Tang dynasty would be in danger? How could his current uncle sit still? Not only him, but Cheng Yaojin, Wei Zheng Du Ruhui, Fang Xianling, and others also stepped forward quickly. Their average age was not young, and their steps were a little staggered, but this could not stop their determination to worry about the country and the people. Especially Cheng Yaojin, his eyes were wide open. He couldn't believe it because he knew that the current emperor had a good emperor who worried about the country and the people. He had deeply understood this since he followed Li Shimin. He had gone through fire and water with the soldiers, ate and slept with them. How could such an emperor have any ominous sign? There was also Wei Zheng. He also couldn't believe it. Although His Majesty was sometimes lazy, violent, and ruthless, His Majesty was a qualified monarch because he handled political affairs conscientiously every day. How could there be an ominous sign? This was really a little ridiculous. Li Shimin naturally noticed the nervous expressions on the faces of the officials. He was very gratified that he was able to receive the support of everyone. He did not waste his time as the ruler. But what was this ominous sign? He thought of the change in the Xuanwu Gate. Could it be that Yuan Tiangong's words were true? Even the heavens were dissatisfied and wanted to punish him with misfortune? If that was the case, he hoped that God would not punish the people of the Tang dynasty. After praying in his heart, he turned his eyes to Yuan Tiangang again, but his heart was in a mess. Taoist Yuan, please continue. Li Shimin's face was a little pale, and only his trembling hands showed his inner fear. Yes, Your Majesty. Yuan Tiangang cupped his hands and said slowly under everyone's complicated gaze. Do you still remember the Pre-Qin bewilderment stone? What? Wei Zheng's eyes widened, his hands trembling as he shot a glance at the object in the sky. You mean to say that the object in the sky is Mars? As soon as he finished speaking, there was an uproar among the officials. What? Is Mars? How could it be? The three words Mars stone were like a stone thrown into a calm water surface, instantly causing countless ripples. Most of the people present were Confucian scholars. They were familiar with history and deeply knew what the three words Mars represented. It was a star of misfortune. Mars was known as Mars due to its fiery glow and unpredictable whereabouts. It was also known as the Crimson Star, the Punishment Star, and the Law Enforcement Star. Throughout history, whenever Mars appeared, there would be endless disasters and countless casualties. The earliest record was in the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period. King Hui of Chu destroyed the Chun dynasty, which was said to have a great relationship with Mars. Later, when Zhang unified the 6 states, Mars fell on the East County and was engraved with 6 words. The first emperor died and the land was divided, causing countless innocent people in the East County to suffer. At the end of the Western Han dynasty, someone reported to the Prime Minister of Emperor Chang of Han that there was a celestial phenomenon of Mars guarding the heart, and the Prime Minister committed suicide. All kinds of signs showed that Mars was a star of misfortune and an ominous sign. Thinking of this, everyone shuddered and unconsciously trembled. They were all officials of the Tang dynasty and naturally did not want such a disaster to befall the Tang dynasty, especially Li Shimin, who had killed countless people and carried countless sins. Today, Mars fell from the sky. Wasn't this a punishment from the heavens? Could it be that it was punishing the people of the Tang dynasty? He had killed countless people. How could he punish his own people? He was a little scared. Although he did not believe in these things, he could not help but believe what was in front of him. Taoist, are you sure this is Mars? Li Shimin's hands trembled and glanced at the thing in the sky from time to time. You can't be wrong about this, can you? Yes, Taoist, you can't be careless about this kind of thing. Taoist, Mars isn't just a joke. Taoist, why don't you do another divination? Everyone asked with a worried look. If Mars really appeared, they would also be victims. Now, they did not dare to be careless. Yuan Tiangang glanced at the nervous crowd and his hands were a little sweaty. Then, he looked at Li Shimin and said with a serious face, Your Majesty, I'm just guessing. May I ask, other than Mars, who can fly in the sky? Forgive me for my ignorance. As soon as he said this, the people who had a glimmer of hope were completely disappointed. Chapter 1841. Yes, apart from Mars, what else could fly in the sky? Immortals? But why had they never seen it before? They couldn't find an excuse to refute for a while, so they just looked at each other and kept silent. Taoist, even if this is Mars, do you have a way to break it? Or what will happen to this disaster? Li Shimin's face was drained of blood because he knew that wherever Mars landed, there would be calamity. This was an unchanging principle since time immemorial, and since there was no way to change it now, he could only minimize the damage. He looked at Yuan Tiangang with hope, but what he got in return was a bitter look. Yuan Tiangang shook his head and frowned. Your Majesty, everyone, it's not that I didn't try my best. If this is really Mars, even if my master comes, It won't help. What? It won't help. How could this be? With tears in their eyes, everyone looked at the thing in the sky unwillingly and shouted that the heaven was unfair. At this time, they really believed what Yuan Tiangang said, because they knew that there was nothing that could fly in the sky. If there really was, it had to be Mars, and the Tang Empire was about to usher in an unprecedented disaster. Everyone kept crying and complaining. Some people even sat on the stone platform, shouting that the people were innocent and the heaven was unfair. Even Li Shimin was leaning against a pillar, his eyes brimming with tears. He now truly suspected that it was he who had attracted Mars, that the heavens had sent down this divine retribution. But were the people of the great Tang guilty? Did they have to be implicated by him? He kept knocking on the pillar with grief in his heart. Just as he was immersed in his sorrow, a trembling figure walked up to him and spoke in a hoarse voice. "Your Majesty, why don't you issue an edict of guilt?" The one who spoke was Wei Zheng. As the head of all the officials, the only way he could think of right now was to have Li Shimin issue an edict. This was the most direct method, and it was also the method that had been frequently used in previous dynasties. Li Shimin slowly raised his head and glanced at Wei Zheng and the officials behind him. He was struggling in his heart. If he announced that he had committed a crime, would he not admit that he had done wrong? But what about Mars if he didn't? Were they really going to let Mars bring disaster upon them? The commoners were innocent. Forget it. Forget it, this is the only way now. After struggling for a while, he finally made up his mind and waved his hand helplessly. "Write the decree for me." "Yes, Your Majesty." Wei Zheng seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. He slowly walked towards the imperial study with his hunched body. "Hold on." Just as Wei Zheng was about to step into the room, a loud shout was heard. Wei Zheng stopped in his tracks and turned around slowly. When he saw that it was Li Chunfeng, he couldn't help but ask, "Taoist, why did you stop the old man?" As soon as he finished speaking, everyone looked at Li Chunfeng in confusion. Now that it was confirmed that it was Mars, why did Li Chunfeng come out to cause trouble? Was he going to stop His Majesty from announcing that he had committed a crime? They couldn't understand Li Chunfeng's behavior, including Yuan Tiangang. He didn't know what was wrong with this guy who was both a teacher and a friend. He could only look at him curiously. "Everyone, listen to me first." Li Chunfeng cupped his hands at the crowd, then glanced at the sky and said with a serious face, "In my opinion, it shouldn't be Mars in the sky." "What? It's not Mars? Are you serious?" The desolate eyes of the officials suddenly seemed to light up, and they strode forward, grabbing each other's arms and tugging at their robes in impatience. These words could change the fate of the great Tang, so they didn't dare to be careless. Li Shimin was the same. He strode forward like a tiger and stared with a serious face. "Is what you said true?" He didn't dare to be careless because he was the Tang emperors. If anything happened to him, thousands of people would die. "Don't worry, everyone. Let go of me first." Li Chunfeng's face turned red. He must have been pushed by the crowd. "Everyone, let go of me first. Then I can speak frankly." "Everyone, please stop." Li Shimin saw that the situation was not right and quickly stopped the crowd. "Everyone, back down. Otherwise, how can Taoist Li speak frankly?" Everyone reluctantly let go of Li Chunfeng and took half a step back. They knew that Li Chunfeng wouldn't be able to say anything if they were to hold on to him like that. Even though they took a step back, their eyes were filled with anticipation. "Taoist Li, can you speak frankly now?" Li Shimin's face was gloomy and expressionless. He wasn't worried that Li Chunfeng would lie to him because he knew that Li Chunfeng was just a Taoist. He was worried that Li Chunfeng would give him hope and not disappoint him. Li Chunfeng didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Yuan Tiangang beside him. Yuan Tiangang gave him a look that said nothing. Only then did Li Chunfeng feel relieved. He had overturned the conclusion of others. Naturally, he had to say hello to others. Moreover, this person was his good friend who was both a teacher and a friend. Chapter 1842. At the same time in Chang'an City. At this time, it was the busiest time in Chang'an City. The streets and alleys were filled with the sound of merchants soliciting customers. Servants shuttled through the crowd. Peddlers were walking and stopping with goods on their shoulders. Pairs of men and women were choosing goods on the shelves. The whole city was bustling with people coming and going. It was very lively. Zhu Zi was still hawking on the street with the fermented glutinous rice as usual. Fermented glutinous rice. Fermented glutinous rice. Just then, a roar came from behind. Zhu Zi. It's Huzi. Zhu Zi stopped and glanced behind him. Huzi held the load on his shoulder and quickly stepped forward to walk side by side with Zhu Zi. Zhu Zi, how's the business today? How can it be? It's the same as usual. Zhu Zi smiled and patted the jar with his left hand. There was a hollow sound. Looks like you're doing well today. Huzi glanced at the jar and smiled. Do you want to take a rest? Okay. Zhu Zi agreed without hesitation. Then, he glanced at the corner and said, let's go there to rest. After that, he walked to the corner with the load on his shoulder. Leaning against the corner, he put down the load. Huzi followed him closely. The two sat on the ground. Huzi wiped the sweat on his forehead and said with a smile, Zhu Zi, where's your fermented glutinous rice? Take it out and let me taste it. I'll exchange it with a steamed bun. After that, he lifted his clothes and fanned himself casually. His eyes drifted around and the sky from time to time. Suddenly, he seemed to find something. His eyes widened. He couldn't believe it, but he didn't know what it was. He just kept pointing at it with his fingers. Huzi, your fermented glutinous rice. Zhu Zi handed over the fermented glutinous rice, but found that Huzi was pointing at the sky. His eyes widened and his mouth kept muttering something. Huzi, what's wrong with you? Zhu Zi shook Huzi and asked with concern. What is that? Huzi was still pointing at the sky. His body was trembling and he couldn't speak clearly. Zhu Zi curiously glanced in the direction of Huzi's finger. He didn't know if he didn't look, but when he looked, he was shocked. His pupils instantly shrank and his body trembled. Could this be the legendary Bane? As soon as these words came out, Huzi quivered and instantly sobered up a lot. He grabbed the pillar and shouted, What Bane? Calamity, star. Zhu Zi trembled as he glanced at the sky. Then he looked at Huzi. His face was pale and his body trembled. I heard from the older generation that when something like this appears in the sky, it's a jinx. What? Huzi's face turned pale. He turned around to grab his load, but his trembling arms made him unable to exert any strength. As he grabbed the load, he muttered, The jinx is here. What should I do with my baby? He tried to grab it a few times, but he still couldn't lift it. In the end, he gave up and ran towards his house. As he ran, he shouted, The jinx is here. The jinx is here. When Zhu Zi heard this, he seemed to have thought of something and ran towards his house. He didn't even care about his load. As he ran, he shouted, Jinx, jinx. He deeply understood what a jinx meant. It was to bring disaster to the world. The older generation said that once a jinx descended, the world would be in chaos. People would eat people, foreign races would begin to invade, and such things would come with the jinx. The people who would suffer would be the common people. Then what would happen to his mother? What would happen to his baby? Thinking of this, he sped up and shuttled through the crowd. He kept shouting as if he was under a spell. Soon, someone noticed this abnormality. At the same time, they also heard what they were saying. They couldn't help but wonder, Jinx? What jinx? Perhaps it was due to the influence of traditional thinking, or perhaps it was because of curiosity. This person intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the sky. At this moment, he saw it. He saw the jinx that those people were talking about. Suddenly, his eyes widened. His brain seemed to have received an endless shock. He crazily shouted, In the sky! There's a jinx in the sky? Look! Everyone look! This roar instantly attracted the attention of the people around. They glanced at this guy with some doubts. Jinx? How is that possible? Now is the time when the weather is good. The Tang dynasty is gradually flourishing. How can there be a jinx? Besides, Lao Tzu had lived for decades and had never seen a jinx. Now, you've seen one? Most people held an attitude of disbelief. They thought that this guy was just crazy. Some people were even cursing him in their hearts. However, there were still some curious people. They didn't believe it. They couldn't help but shout in their hearts and look at the sky. Jinx, is it really a jinx? A jinx appeared in the sky. In an instant, everyone around shouted. They widened their eyes and pointed to the sky. Their faces were full of surprise and disbelief. The roars became louder and louder, spreading farther and farther. The streets and alleys of Chang and city began to shout non-stop. Chapter 1843. As the sound spread further and further, there was a commotion on the streets of Chang. The peddlers were not in the mood to sell their goods, and the manservants stopped shouting. They all looked up at the sky with fear, doubt, and disbelief written all over their faces. Because in their education, the jinx was a sign that a disaster was coming. If the Tang dynasty was going to be hit by a disaster, what should they do? They were just ordinary people. Did God want them to die? The defense line in their hearts began to collapse bit by bit. Fear took over their bodies and minds. Some people even knelt down and began to pray, hoping to pray for themselves and their families so that the jinx would show mercy. After the first person knelt down, the second, the third, and countless people began to kneel down. The streets of Chang were filled with people kneeling down. They put their hands together and kept kowtowing on the ground. They were also chanting, hoping that the jinx would spare them and their families so that their families would suffer less. Soon, the streets of Chang were covered with blood. On average, one could see people kneeling down with every step. Of course, not everyone knelt on the ground. Some people who cared about their families could not stay any longer and ran home. However, there were too many people kneeling down. For a moment, there were fights and mutinies. In less than a quarter of an hour, the streets of Chang were filled with blood and flesh. Arms and legs were hanging on the side of the street. The scene was very frightening. This scene quickly attracted the attention of the soldiers stationed in Chang and city. They looked in the direction of the people's kowtowing to the sky. As a result, they saw something they had never seen before. To be precise, it was something they had never seen before in their lives. There was an unidentified flying object in the sky. Their faces were full of horror. The spears in their hands seemed to have lost their strength and slid to the ground. Their hands kept pointing at the sky. The muscles on their faces trembled. Shock and uneasiness shrouded them. Was it really like what the people said? The jinx had appeared in the sky? Was the jinx about to descend? Was the world going to be in chaos? All kinds of doubts surrounded the people like a haze that could not be dispersed. Logically speaking, they were all soldiers. They only had awe and even a little doubt in their hearts. However, based on the historical materials of the past and the various signs of the people today, this was really the jinx. It was going to kill people. Since the world was going to be in chaos, then what was the point of being a soldier? Since they were going to die sooner or later, they might as well go home first. Moreover, the people had already rebelled. As the guards of Chang and city, they would definitely be punished. In that case, they might as well take care of their own business. At the thought of this, many soldiers began to run down the city tower. They didn't dare to wait any longer. They wanted to reunite with their families. Every moment of delay meant one less moment of reunion. Even if they were to die, they wanted to die together. Everyone was selfish. Humans are fearful of the unknown. Humans have emotions too. In the face of life and death, they would only worry about their loved ones. They were soldiers, but they were also human beings. They were not inferior to ordinary people. In fact, they valued these things more than ordinary people. After the first deserter, the second deserter soon followed. The gate of Chang and city was opened wide, and countless soldiers began to file out. Their destination was not the battlefield, but their hometown. More and more deserters began to run down the city tower. With the flow of people in and out, the city gate was congested. Countless people were trampled to death. There were also some deserters who saw that they couldn't get in or out of the city gate. They even chose to jump off the city wall. One could imagine the consequences of jumping off the city wall, which was more than 10 meters high. However, they didn't hesitate, and they didn't dare to hesitate. Because once the star of calamity appeared, it would be more terrible than death. Just as everyone rushed down the city tower crazily, a guard general strode out with a Tang sword at his waist. His face was solemn, and he was followed by a team of 10 people. Each of them was holding a three-edged bayonet and killed decisively. "What are you doing?" This guard general was called Su Lian. He was the guard general of Chang City. He was resting in the city when someone reported that an unknown object had appeared in the sky. He specially came to check it out, but he saw this tragic scene. Everyone looked up and saw that it was the general. As if they had seen their backbone, they stopped jumping off the building, but their bodies kept trembling. "General, the star of calamity has appeared in the sky. The people have gone crazy." Some people pointed at the people under the city wall, while others pointed at the unknown object in the sky. Their voices became more and more trembling. "Star of calamity?" Su Lian frowned and glanced at the sky in the direction of the guard general's fingers. In an instant, he felt terrible. What the hell is this? Why is there something flying in the sky? This was not logical at all. Why would such a situation occur? Is it really like what everyone said? The star of calamity has appeared? The world will be in chaos. The world will be in chaos. Thinking of these words, his right hand that was holding the sword suddenly trembled, and he couldn't help but feel cold. If that's the case, then the Tang dynasty will be finished. The people will be finished. Right, there are also the people. Have the people gone crazy? Chapter 1844. He shuddered in an instant and strode toward the city wall. His body trembled violently at this glance. Then, he felt his vision go black and his body fell backward unconsciously. "General! General, are you okay?" The 10-man squad behind him supported Si Lian with concern. They were Si Lian's personal guards and regarded the general's life as more important than their own. Si Lian, who was in a coma, was suddenly awakened by the violent impact. He glanced at the crowd, raised his trembling right hand, and shouted, "Quick! Send people down to suppress them. We can't let the people cause a mutiny." Although he was terrified, he was a soldier of the Tang dynasty. This was an honor earned by his military exploits. How could he follow those deserters at this moment? That would be a waste of his finger that was chopped off on the battlefield. Moreover, if there was a mutiny in Chang, and he would die, and so would the Bane. Why not choose a glorious way to die? These thoughts might work on him, but the soldiers on the city wall didn't buy it. They were just foot soldiers. Why should they suppress the people in such a situation? Wasn't that courting death? This was a calamity. Who could stop it? "General, you'd better let us go." "Yes, General. We can't suppress it at all." The crowd looked at Si Lian pleadingly. At this moment, they were still thinking about how to leave. However, the general's prestige had been deeply imprinted in their hearts. They didn't dare to leave without an order, because even if they left, the general could find them. Deserters would be killed, and even their wives and children would be implicated. They couldn't bear the consequences. "What?" Si Lian's eyes narrowed. He took out the Tang saber from his waist and looked at the crowd fiercely. He shouted, "Can't suppress it? Do you want to be deserters?" Desertion was a capital offense. As long as someone dared to say the word deserter, he would cut him down without hesitation. "General, we..." Everyone looked at Si Lian timidly. For a moment, they were speechless because they knew they were in the wrong. Desertion was not something to be proud of. It was a capital offense. Moreover, the general's prestige was deeply buried in their hearts. At this moment, they didn't dare to say anything. They were afraid that they would die if they said the wrong thing. Si Lian naturally understood what everyone was thinking. If he wasn't here, these guys would have fled long ago. However, once he showed up, he wouldn't allow any deserters. At the very least, such a situation couldn't happen within his jurisdiction. "Since none of you are deserters, listen to my orders." Si Lian glanced at the crowd and raised his Tang saber up high. He shouted, "Go and suppress the people. Anyone who disobeys will be beheaded." "Yes, General," everyone replied unwillingly. They picked up the scattered spears on the ground and ran down the city gate, glancing into the distance from time to time. Hopefully, the lives of the brothers who escaped are not in danger. Sigh, what time is it now? How can I still have the time to care about others? I should take care of myself first. Bitter laughter, dissatisfaction, and ridicule accompanied the crowd as they surged toward the common people. Bang, bang, bang. Sounds of footsteps came from Chang'an City. The guards were all armed with spears and Mitsubishi bayonets at their waists. They lined up in a square formation and looked at the frenzied common people with complicated expressions. A young man holding a Tang saber walked out from the group. Everyone, listen up. Don't stay on the streets. Go home immediately. The one who spoke was Si Lian's deputy general, Sang Feng. He held his Tang saber and looked at the common people with a serious expression. He looked like he would start a fight at any moment. However, his words didn't have any effect. The common people were still standing on the spot and discussing. Some of them were kneeling down as if they didn't see him. Everyone, listen up. Don't stay on the streets. Go home immediately. Sang Feng was a little angry and repeated his words. He had decided that if the common people didn't go home, he would use force. The effect was minimal. The common people didn't pay attention to his words at all. It was as if they had gone crazy. The number of people kneeling down even increased. Men, prepare to force your way in. Sang Feng raised his right hand and gave the order. Don't hurt the common people. Just chase them home. Yes. The people behind him responded in unison. Then they put their Mitsubishi bayonets at their waists and rushed out. What are you doing? Stop it. Why do you dare to let us go home? The attack of the crowd instantly caused an intense response from the common people. They used their bodies as shields and resisted the soldiers. Due to the large number of common people, the soldiers were actually at a disadvantage. Furthermore, they didn't have orders and didn't dare to hurt the common people. Slowly, the situation started to deteriorate. On the city tower, Si Lian looked at everything in front of him. He clenched his right fist and cold sweat dripped down his forehead. He had a bad feeling. The common people were gathering and kowtowing on the ground. If this continued, it would definitely cause a mutiny. It seemed like he had to inform the higher-ups. Chapter 1845. Otherwise, as time went by, there would be countless casualties in Chang'an City, which was not something he could bear. Thinking of this, he slammed his palm on the black brick, glanced at the civilians and soldiers in the scuffle unwillingly, and then turned to look at the team on standby. Spread out immediately and inform Mr. Wei Zheng, Mr. Zhang Sun Wuji, Mr. Fang Xianling, Mr. Du Ruhui, and so on. Inform all the officials in Chang'an City. After that, he seemed to think of something and said again, prepare the horse. I'm going to Marquis Lu's mansion right away. Without waiting for a reply, he quickly walked down the gate tower. At this time, the horse was already on his back. Si Lian jumped on the horse and rushed to Marquis Lu's mansion. Get out of the way! Get out of the way! He glared and kept shouting to the front, waving the horsewhip in his hand. Although the people in the discussion were crazy, they were not unafraid of death. Seeing the horse galloping, they knew that he was not someone to be trifled with, so they all made way. After half an hour, Si Lian smoothly arrived at Marquis Lu's mansion. Quick, go and report to Marquis Lu. Something big has happened. Si Lian shouted to the servant at the door before dismounting, because in his opinion, this matter had reached the point where it could not be delayed. The servant's face changed. Knowing that something must have happened, he rushed into the mansion. Whoosh! Si Lian reined in the horse, dismounted, and jumped to Cheng's mansion. As soon as he entered the door, he heard an unhappy roar. Is it that bastard? How dare he disturb Lao Tzu for no reason? The voice was Cheng Yaojin. He strode to the door and bumped into Si Lian. He frowned and said, It's you, little bastard. Why do you come to me instead of guarding the gate of Chang'an City? Something big has happened, Marquis. Si Lian panted heavily as he looked at Cheng Yaojin with a serious expression. Motherf ***, what could possibly happen? Could it be that the sky has collapsed? Chang Yaojin was somewhat dissatisfied. He was originally practicing martial arts at home, but was disturbed by this brat. How could he not be angry? Duke, please calm down first. Shi Lian swallowed his saliva in an attempt to soothe his dry throat. He grabbed Chang Yaojin's left hand and pointed at the sky. Duke, look at what's in the sky. In the sky? Chang Yaojin frowned and was a little puzzled. What the hell are you doing? Although his mouth was unforgiving, he knew that Shi Lian wouldn't dare to lie to him. Perhaps there really was something up in the sky. He glanced at the sky, and this glance instantly made him feel uncomfortable. What is this? Chang Yaojin raised his right hand high and glared with his tiger-like eyes. Duke, I don't know either. Shi Lian pulled a long face and said helplessly, Now, the citizens of Chang'an City are all saying that the thing in the sky is a jinx. They are all praying. Chang'an City is already in chaos, and there are even casualties. What did you say? Chang Yaojin's body shook violently, and he slapped him with a backhand. He glared at him and said, Why didn't you stop something like this from happening in Chang'an City? As a duke, he had the responsibility to protect Chang'an. Now that something like this had happened, the first thing he thought of was order. Duke, you can't blame me for this. Shi Lian touched his burning cheeks and felt wronged. Duke, I've already sent people to stop it, but there's little effect. The citizens are convinced that the jinx is a jinx, and they are close to going crazy. Then what are you waiting for? Take my waist token and go borrow soldiers from Big Hay. Chang Yaojin looked as if he expected better from Shi Lian. He took out a waist token from his waist and threw it to Shi Lian. Go find Big Hay immediately. I have to go to the palace to discuss this with Her Majesty. Without waiting for Shi Lian to reply, he walked to the door and said, Chang Yi, prepare a horse to go to the palace. When he arrived at the door, the horse was already prepared. Chang Yaojin jumped on the horse, held a long whip in his hand, and left in the direction of the palace. At the same time, in Wei Zheng's residence, groups of servants and maidservants gathered together. They pointed their fingers at the sky, their bodies trembling, and their mouths muttering something. What's that? That's the jinx, the legendary jinx. As soon as these words came out, the crowd exploded. Cries of surprise and pleas connected together. The entire front yard was like a sudden clap of thunder, and it was out of control. They were all ordinary citizens, and they had a deep fear of the jinx. Although this fear was passed down from the older generation, they finally understood what it was like after seeing it today. It was like the sky was falling and the earth was sinking. The cries of surprise in the courtyard became louder and louder until it spread throughout the Wei residence. Why are you crying out? A middle-aged man who looked like a servant walked out and pointed at the crowd. He was the steward of the Wei residence and was usually in charge of all matters in the residence, such as disciplining the servants. Usually, these fellows would refuse to do any work, but today they actually had the leisure to talk about right and wrong. It seemed like they were really looking for a beating. Chapter 1846. Thinking of this, he quickly stepped forward and prepared to fight with the servant. Butler, butler, don't fight. Look at the sky. A servant timidly took half a step back and pointed to the sky, his face full of horror. The sky! The butler was a little confused. Is this guy trying to attract my attention? But this guy doesn't seem to be faking it, and these guys are all looking at the sky. Is there really something there? He looked at the sky with curiosity. In an instant, his pupils shrank, and his body trembled unconsciously. This is a jinx? A jinx is coming to the world. The butler kept waving his hands, and his body became stronger and stronger. Master, master, something big has happened. As he shouted, he rolled and crawled to the study. Now that such a thing had happened, only a big shot like his master could control the overall situation. Otherwise, the sky would fall. Thinking of this, his steps became more urgent, and he almost stumbled. He hurried and finally reached the study. In the study, Wei Zhang was reading a book in one hand and holding a cigarette in the other. He was wandering in the sea of knowledge, and he paid no attention to the outside world. Master, master, something big has happened. The butler suddenly sat on the ground, as if he had exhausted all his strength. Wei Zheng frowned and was a little dissatisfied. He hated being disturbed when he was reading, so he told the servants that no one could come in when he was reading. But now, why did this butler come in? Doesn't this guy know the rules? Impossible, this guy was the first to know. Did something happen? When he saw the butler sitting on the ground, he was more convinced that something big had happened. What the hell is going on? What happened outside? Wei Zheng put down the book, suddenly sat up from the chair, and looked at the butler with a pair of bright eyes. Master, a jinx has appeared in the sky. People outside have been talking about it. With tears in his eyes, the butler said with a sad face. What? Wei Zheng strode forward and stared at the helpless body of the butler. His face changed greatly. What did you just say? A jinx? Yes, master. An unknown object appeared in the sky. Everyone said it was a jinx. I guess the news has spread all over Chang'an City. The butler pointed to the sky and gestured as he spoke. Wei Zheng's face immediately paled. He hurriedly walked out of the door. He wanted to see if this so-called bane was real or fake. As soon as he walked out of the door, he couldn't wait to look up. At that moment, he felt as if the sky was about to collapse. It really was the star of calamity, and it was Mars. One had to know that Mars was an ominous star, also known as the Crimson Star, the Punishment Star, and the Enforcer Star. Because it was red in color and glowed like fire, it floated erratically in the sky, sometimes from west to east, and sometimes from east to west. Its situation was complicated and confusing, so historical records recorded it as Mars, which meant that it was a symbol of glowing fire and confusion. According to legend, the fall of the Preqin dynasty had something to do with Mars. According to the records of Qin Shi Huang, for 36 years, Antares guarded the heart. There was a falling star in the East County, and the ground was a stone. Qian Shou carved the stone with the words, "The first emperor died and the ground was divided." When Qin Shi Huang heard of it, he sent the imperial censor to question it. None of it was convinced, and all the stones were taken away. He didn't have the slightest doubt about all this, because the thing in the sky was exactly the same as the Mars recorded in historical records. Wherever Mars appeared, the world would be in chaos. Looking at the place where Mars appeared, it was right above Chang'an City. Didn't that mean that the Tang dynasty was going to suffer a great disaster? What about the people of Chang'an City? What about the people of the world? His heart was filled with grief. He only felt darkness in front of his eyes and fell backward. Master, master. The butler strode forward and hugged Wei Zheng's bent body. Wei Zheng took half a step back and slowly opened his eyes. His face was pale and his hand was on the door frame. He faintly felt that something was wrong. Why did Mars appear above Chang'an City? Why did Mars appear at this time? Was this a sign of something? The appearance of Mars often had something to do with the people in power. It had been like this since ancient times. Every time Mars appeared, it was the time when the dynasty changed. Now that Mars suddenly appeared, could it be related to the current emperor? Li Erlang? He had killed countless people in the past, even his brother, and slaughtered the entire East Palace. Wasn't such a sin the most powerful evidence to prove Mars? Now that Mars had appeared, it was clearly accusing Li Erlang of wrongdoing. It was Mars brought by Li Erlang. It was the disaster brought by Li Erlang. It was also Li Erlang that caused the heavens to be dissatisfied. Wei Zheng didn't dare to think about it anymore. He raised his trembling right hand and pointed in the direction of the palace, and said sternly, "Prepare the horse, we're going to the palace." After that, he walked out of the mansion with his bent body. He didn't dare to delay such an important matter, and he couldn't afford to delay it. Of course, he wasn't the only one with such thoughts. Zhangsun Wuji also had such thoughts. Chapter 1847. At this time, Zhangsun Mansion was in chaos. Since the servants knew that this was the star of calamity, no one worked anymore. Some stood in a daze, some knelt on the ground, praying in their hearts, and some jumped over the courtyard to escape. This was the star of calamity. Once it descended, the entire Tang dynasty would be in chaos. What was the use of staying in Zhangsun Mansion? It was better to go home and hide. The servants fled one after another, and the huge mansion withered in an instant. Zhang Sun Wuji stood in the front yard, looking up at the sky with fear on his face. His heart was very complicated. He already knew that this was Mars just now. At the same time, he also knew that wherever Mars descended, there would be disasters. But what crimes did the people of the Tang dynasty commit? What crimes did the people of the world commit? These were all done by Li Erlang. If he didn't kill his brother, how could this disaster happen today? Even the heavens couldn't stand it anymore and wanted to punish Li Erlang. The funny thing was that he was once Li Erlang's accomplice. But thinking about it, he and Li Erlang were relatives. How could he just stand by and do nothing? Men, prepare the horse. Zhang Sun Wuji waved his sleeves and walked straight out the door. He decided to go to the palace and ask Li Erlang for an explanation. Today's disaster was definitely related to him. Zhang Sun Wuji didn't say anything along the way. His face was gloomy, and it was hard to tell whether he was happy or sad. Only his trembling arms betrayed the fear in his heart. The coachman also knew the severity of the matter. He didn't dare to delay. With a wave of his whip, he rushed straight to the palace. Whoosh! The carriage stopped at the Vermilion Bird Gate, and Zhang Sun Wuji darted out of the carriage. Just as he was about to head into the palace, there was a commotion coming from not far away. He casually took a glance and saw that it was Wei Zheng, Fang Xianling, and the others. Almost all the famous officials in the imperial court were present. Lord Wei, Lord Fang. Why are you all here? Zhang Sun Wuji's face was still gloomy. The laughter between brothers in the past was gone. For Mars in the sky, of course. Wei Zheng stood up with a walking stick in his hand. His face was pale. That's right. With the appearance of Mars, your Majesty cannot escape responsibility. Fang Xianling glanced at the crowd, each word resounding. Zhang Sun Wuji nodded. He could not refute this point. Even if he was the emperor's brother-in-law, he could not be partial. Even Lu Guogong, Chang Yaojin, who was standing to the side, was silent because he deeply understood what the bane meant. Since all of you are of the same mind, let's enter the palace together. Zhang Sun Wuji swept his gaze across the crowd, and finally, his gaze landed on Wei Zheng. This was because he did not speak just now, which was not in line with this old man's character. However, with a glance, he realized that Wei Zheng was a little different today. He could not help but ask, Lord Wei, I thought you don't usually use a crutch? Why today? Bang, bang, bang. Wei Zheng slammed the crutch in his hand on the ground, but his face was pale. It's all because of Mars. After that, he glanced at the direction of the imperial study. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he looked intimidating. Let's go. Today we must get an explanation from His Majesty. That's right. Today we must get an explanation from His Majesty. Everyone, let's go. Everyone's expression was unfriendly as they walked straight to the palace gate. The guards at the palace gate were a little flustered. Why were all these court officials here today? Could it be that something big had happened? They were puzzled, but they did not intend to show favoritism. Without an audience with His Majesty, entering the palace gate was considered trespassing. That was punishable by death. Looking at the approaching court officials, the guard touched the Tang saber in his hand. His eyes revealed a trace of coldness. Halt, or you will be punished for trespassing. They knew that these were court officials, but without an audience with His Majesty, it was trespassing. As soldiers, they only followed orders and did not recognize the person. Of course, they were not really going to attack. They just wanted to stop these people and report back to His Majesty. After all, the person in front of them was more than 10 ranks higher than them. If they were to attack him, they might be raided tomorrow. They did not dare to take such a risk. What did you just say? Zhang Sun Wuji took a step forward. His eyes were half narrowed, and there was a chill in his gaze. Sir, you cannot trespass into the Vermilion Bird Palace gate. Looking at Zhang Sun Wuji's eyes, the guard was a little scared. The other party was an official more than 10 ranks higher than him. However, when he thought about it, if he allowed them to enter the palace without an audience, he and his brothers would be sentenced to death. Unknowingly, his courage grew. "Sir, please show me your edict, or let the palace servants bring you in. Otherwise, please forgive my rudeness." After that, he pulled out the Tang saber at his waist. Then he swept a glance behind him. Everyone immediately understood and pulled out their Tang sabers in unison. All right. Wei Zheng walked out of the crowd shakily with his walking stick. He laughed coldly. "Looks like you want to repeat the incident at the Black Tortoise Gate. Then, I will wait for you here today." After that, he glanced in the direction of the Black Tortoise Gate. He seemed to be touched. Chapter 1848. The Gate of Black Tortoise was the place where Li Erlang killed his brother. It was also the place where Li Erlang rose to fame. Ever since Li Erlang ascended to the throne, no one dared to mention the Gate of Black Tortoise because it was taboo for Li Erlang. It was also a haze in Li Erlang's heart. But today, in front of all the officials, not only did he mention the Gate of Black Tortoise, he also humiliated the guards to express his anger. The officials behind him were not surprised by Wei Zheng's mention of the Gate of Black Tortoise. Instead, they felt that what he said made sense. If Li Erlang did not kill his brother, why would Mars be born today? All of this was related to Li Erlang. Everyone looked at the guards with anger. The anger in their hearts was self-evident. "What?" Wei Zheng's face darkened. He glanced at the guards and said coldly, "Didn't you want to take my life? Come on." Then he purposely took half a step forward, looking like a hero. The guards did not dare to be disrespectful. They knew how important this person was. If he dared to scold the emperor, then what about them? But if they retreated, how could they explain it to the emperor? Everyone looked at each other and didn't know what to do for a moment. Even the right hand holding the sword began to tremble. The veins on his forehead were bulging. "You bastards, get out of my way, or else I will tear you apart." Chang Yaojin stood out with a pair of tiger-like eyes, looking like he was ready to fight at any moment. "That's right. Asking you to get out of my way is your honor, or else I will kill you right now." The Grand Scribe stood out as well. His right hand kept stroking the triangular blade on his waist. His bloodthirsty eyes scanned the guards. The guards looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Seeing that the crowd was still blocking the way, the Grand Scribe was furious. He pulled out his tri-edge bayonet and walked towards the guards. "It seems that you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Today I will send you to the Western Paradise." "Brother, wait for me." Chang Yaojin clenched his fists, which made creaking sounds, and rushed forward like an arrow. This posture frightened the guards. The Grand Scribe? Duke Lu? The two big shots were actually fighting for the sake of entering the palace. Everyone knew that they were no match for them and fled into the palace. They had to report the situation here to His Majesty, or else they would lose their heads. "Humph!" Chang Yaojin coldly snorted and glanced at the fleeing guards. He secretly spat. "Luckily you bastards ran fast enough, otherwise Lao Tzu would definitely cripple you." After he finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something. He turned around and said with a serious expression, "Lord Wei, Lord Fong, Lord Zhongsun, please leave." Although he usually didn't like these guys, he still admired their attitude and appearance today, especially this Wei Zheng, who had a fearless face. Seeing that the palace door was no longer blocked, the officials all walked towards the palace door at the same time. They were heading towards the imperial study. Everyone was aggressive and had a serious expression. It was as if there was no one in the palace. Even if there were eunuchs and palace servants, when they saw this scene, they would stay far away for fear of attracting trouble. In a moment, they arrived at the door of the imperial study. At this time, little Gizi was standing at the door waiting for orders. When he saw the officials gathered, he was surprised. Why were so many officials gathered together? Could it be that something big had happened? However, he quickly suppressed the surprise in his heart. After all, he was His Majesty's personal eunuch. He couldn't be so ignorant. "Sirs, why are you all gathered here today? Do you have something important to discuss with His Majesty? Shall I inform His Majesty?" Little Gizi looked at the officials with a smile, nodding and bowing from time to time. Looking at these guys, it didn't look like anything good. It was better to be cautious. Get lost. Chang Yaojin's face darkened. He kicked him and said coldly, "What right does a eunuch like you have to speak?" After speaking, he didn't wait for little Gizi's reaction and stepped into the imperial study. The other officials followed closely behind. Only little Gizi's screams could be heard. In the imperial study, Li Shimin, who was originally reading through memorials, suddenly raised his head when he heard the noise. He saw the officials standing uniformly in the main hall. Each of them had an unfriendly expression, as if they had encountered a disaster. Li Shimin put down the memorials and frowned as he glanced at the officials. He found that everyone was a little different from usual. Each of them had a serious expression. Even Chang Yaojin, who was usually laughing with him, had a serious expression. He didn't see anyone come forward to salute him. However, this wasn't important. Why did everyone come together and have such a serious expression? This made him a little puzzled. Could it be that he had made a mistake recently? Or did he neglect his political affairs? But he was dealing with political affairs now. His mind was constantly turning, trying to find if he had done something wrong. However, he couldn't find anything. He could only ask tentatively, "What's wrong with everyone today? Your Majesty, you are really leisurely. You even have time to read memorials now." Chapter 1849. Wei Zheng took half a step forward and sneered. Li Shimin frowned and was puzzled. "Why do you say that? Does your Majesty not know what's going on outside?" Wei Zheng snorted and asked in return. He did not believe that His Majesty did not receive any news in the palace. Outside? Li Shimin walked down from the dragon throne and glanced outside the door. He wondered, what could have happened outside? "Your Majesty, something big has happened outside. Mars has descended." Chang Yaojin took a step forward and looked at Li Shimin as he spoke. He originally did not know the 3 words Mars, and only found out after a discussion with the officials. "What? Mars?" Li Shimin's expression changed and his body trembled. He did not doubt Chang Yaojin's words, nor did he doubt the officials. Today's situation was not simple. Moreover, he deeply understood what Mars was. It was a star of misfortune. As long as Mars descended, it would be accompanied by disaster. However, why would Mars descend in Chang'an? Did he do something wrong? Thinking of this, he quickly walked to the entrance of the imperial study and looked up. Instantly, he felt as if the sky was about to collapse. It really was Mars. How could this be? Why would Mars descend from the sky? Could it be that he had killed too much? Was the heavens dissatisfied with him? Was this to punish him? He knew that the descent of Mars was often related to those in power. In the past, the descent of Mars would cause chaos. Could it be that his Tang dynasty was also going to be in chaos? His body trembled and he held the door frame with his hand, feeling helpless. Seeing this, Xiao Gizi hurriedly went forward and supported Li Shimin as they slowly walked towards the imperial study. Just as they walked into the hall, Wei Zheng's cold voice sounded. "Your Majesty, Mars has descended because you have killed too much in your early years. You should give the world an explanation." Wei Zheng picked up his walking stick and slammed it on the ground with a look of indignation. He thought that it was impossible for His Majesty to only know about it now. It must be an act. But he didn't look like one. However, these were not important. What was important now was how His Majesty was going to answer to the people of the world. When the officials saw Wei Zheng stand out, they began to criticize him. "That's right. Your Majesty has killed too many people. You must give the people an explanation. This Mars is a vengeful spirit of the Black Tortoise Gate, here to claim your life. Your Majesty, you should pay your respects. Not only that, Your Majesty, you should also issue an edict and admit your sins to appease the wronged souls." Everyone glared at Li Shimin, filled with righteous indignation, as if they were the souls who had been wronged. Hearing everyone's accusations, Li Shimin panicked. He leaned against the dragon throne, his face pale. "Give an explanation to the people. The vengeful soul of the Black Tortoise Gate? His crimes have been decreed." These words hit him like a hammer in the chest. Normally, if the officials dared to say such things, they would have been punished. But today was different. The appearance of Mars meant that he was immoral and incompetent. But his crimes have been decreed. This was not an honorable thing. It could become a stain that he could not erase for the rest of his life. At this moment, he hesitated. What should he do? Was there anyone who could help him? He had never felt so helpless. Even when he led troops to war, he had never been afraid between life and death. But at this moment, he was truly afraid. He was afraid that Mars really came because of him. He was afraid that everything the officials said, the vengeful spirit of the deposed crown prince, would come for his life. He was even more afraid that the people of the world would suffer because of him. Did he really have to admit that he was useless? Did he really have to admit that he had killed too many people? No. He was the emperor. How could he do such a thing? But who would speak up for him now? He was angry, heartbroken, and even regretful. Just as he was hesitating endlessly, a figure slowly appeared. Zhang Feng? Feng Zi was smart and had many wicked ideas. Perhaps he had a solution. At this thought, it was as if he had grasped at a life-saving straw. Hope flashed in his lonely eyes, and he immediately glanced at little Gizi. Little Gizi had been with him for many years and naturally understood, and slowly came over. Little Gizi, immediately send someone to White Deer College to find Zhang Feng. Tell him the situation here and ask him if he has any solutions. Li Shimon's face was pale, and his voice was hoarse. At this moment, he placed all his hopes on Zhang Feng. Little Gizi understood the severity of the matter, nodded, and left. At this moment, only the civil and military officials and Li Shimon were left in the hall. The atmosphere was very solemn and as calm as the surface of water. But if a stone was thrown, it would immediately cause a reaction. Your Majesty, please do not delay any longer. Immediately decree the crimes have been decreed. Wei Zheng's walking stick thumped on the floor, and he coughed as he spoke. He did not know why Li Erlang was still hesitating. These were the people of the world. Since Li Erlang claimed to be a wise ruler, why did he cast the people aside and ignore them today? Was he really so heartless? Chapter 1850. Your Majesty, please immediately issue an imperial edict. Your Majesty, there is no need to hesitate. The officials spoke up one after another, but there was not the slightest bit of respect in their words, because in their view, Li Erlang had already lost his virtue. Only with the hearts of the people could he become a wise ruler. Right now, they spoke up only from the standpoint of themselves and the people. This included Zhangsun Wuji. Even though he was related to the imperial household and had only been friends with Li Erlang, he still had to make his stance clear on this matter. He had also planned the coup at Xuanwu Gate. If His Majesty refused to admit his mistake, the vengeful spirits would come for his life, and the Zhangsun clan would be the first to suffer. He could not bear the consequences. Of course, he was not the only one with such thoughts. Fang Xianling, Du Ruhui, Gao Shilian, Hou Junji, and Cheng Yaojin all had similar thoughts. All of them had participated in the coup at Xuanwu Gate, and if the vengeful spirits came for their lives, none of them would be able to escape. Thus, they hoped that Li Erlang would admit his mistake. But Li Erlang clearly had no intention of doing so. Li Shimon felt powerless as he listened to the advice of the officials, and a chill ran down his spine. But he still had a sliver of hope: Zhang Feng. As long as Zhang Feng had a plan, the crisis before him could be resolved. Yes, it could definitely be resolved. He constantly comforted himself. His lonely eyes would occasionally glance at the door, hoping that this person who carried his hopes would bring good news. But the advice of the officials was getting more and more intense, and he had no choice but to reply. He could only raise his trembling right hand and wave it. Everyone, withdraw for now. Allow us to reconsider. Reconsider? Wei Zheng glanced at Li Shimon and coldly chuckled. Does Your Majesty not want to face the reality of Mars? After he finished speaking, he glanced at the officials behind him with a hint of disappointment in his eyes. In the past, all of you followed His Majesty to conquer the world, quelling the chaos and cleaning up the mess of the former Sui dynasty. can be said that you have turned the tide and helped the building to collapse. Within the 4 regions, the Tang dynasty was ruled by Emperor Yang of Sui. At this point, he looked at Li Shimin and said coldly, "However, the incident at the Xuanwu Gate, Your Majesty killed your brothers, usurped the throne, and bullied other people's wives and daughters. This is a crime that cannot be reversed. Does Your Majesty want to be slandered by the world? How could the officials face each other in the court? Are palace maids disloyal? You?" Li Shimin pointed at Wei Zheng, his right hand trembling. His face turned green and white, but he could not say a word, because he knew that Wei Zheng was not wrong at all. But every word that he said hit him where it hurt. The incident at the Xuanwu Gate. The incident at the Xuanwu Gate was something that he did not want to talk about. He had killed his brothers there, and used this method to usurp the throne. Could be said that it was a dark part of the imperial family's history. After the incident, he did not want to talk about this sad incident, and also to prevent the world from talking about it. But today Wei Zheng brought this incident up again. His hands trembled and the veins on his forehead popped. He wanted to tear Wei Zheng apart. However, he couldn't because what the other party said was right. He had indeed done such a thing. Furthermore, there were many scholars in the world who had scolded him. Now, whether there was one more Wei Zheng or one less Wei Zheng, what did it matter? It was just one more person scolding him. Thinking of this, his eyes slowly dimmed, as if he had aged dozens of years. "Minister Wei, let me think for a moment. Okay?" This was the first time he spoke to an official like this. He almost used a pleading tone because he knew that all the fault was on him. He could not blame anyone else. Even if Wei Zheng's tone was cold, it was also for the sake of the Tang dynasty. "Think." Du Ruhui stood up. His stooped body showed that he was worried about the country and the people. "Your Majesty, do you want the lives of the people in the world? Well, if Your Majesty is not willing to give an edict, then I will kneel in the imperial study until I die." After that, he glanced at the officials with tears in his eyes. "Everyone, Your Majesty is hesitating now. I will kneel in the imperial study and wait for Your Majesty to listen." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his sleeves and walked out of the door with a righteous face. Seeing Du Ruhui like this, the other officials could not help but feel grief and indignation in their hearts, and spoke one after another. "Master Du, wait. I am also willing to kneel at the door of the imperial study with you. Yes, as the saying goes, establish a heart for heaven and earth and establish a life for the people. I will also go." Everyone followed Du Ruhui's footsteps and walked out of the door with a look of indignation. Soon, only Wei Zheng was left in the hall. He looked at Li Shimin with a complicated expression and turned to leave. In an instant, there was only one person in the imperial study. It was unusually quiet. Li Shimin looked at the silent hall and sat down on the dragon throne. His heart was full of grief, but he had no one to talk to. He slowly took out a cigarette from his waist with his trembling right hand, trying to numb himself with the cigarette. He took it out with a backhand, but there was no lighter. A wave of powerlessness came over him. Usually, for safety, little Gizi always carried the lighter with him. Now that little Gizi was not here, he could not even smoke. As the emperor, it was really ridiculous. Just as he was feeling sad, footsteps came from the door. Chapter 1851. Hearing this, Li Shimin raised his lonely eyes and glanced over. His heart was as taut as a bowstring. Right now, he could only hope that it was Zhang Feng who had come with a solution because only he could solve the current situation. The voice came closer and closer and became more urgent. Not long after, a figure stepped in. It was Xiao Gizi. "Your Majesty, your servant has returned." Xiao Gizi strode forward and spoke as he walked, but his expression was very unsightly. "Come quickly." Li Shimin abruptly stood up, but his trembling legs still made him feel weak. He held the table with his hand and asked expectantly, "Has Zhang Feng been found?" As he spoke, Xiao Gizi had already stepped onto the table, but he did not immediately reply. Instead, his brows were furrowed tightly as if he was thinking about something. His face was somewhat pale. "Hurry up and speak." Li Shimin was a little impatient and hurriedly urged. Right now, he was treating Zhang Feng as a life-saving straw, but this dog of a slave still did not speak. "Your Majesty!" Xiao Gizi frowned and was a little flustered. Then, as if he had made up his mind about something, he carefully leaned over to Li Shimin's ear and whispered, "Your Majesty, something has happened. Zhang Feng has disappeared." "What?" Li Shimin's eyes widened and his face paled. He did not dare to believe it. "Say that again." Xiao Gizi frowned. When he heard this news, he was also shocked. When he came back, he was already thinking about how to tell His Majesty. But after thinking it over and over again, the news could not be hidden, so he planned to speak frankly. However, he did not expect His Majesty's reaction to be so big. "Your Majesty, Zhang Feng has disappeared." He lowered his head and timidly said, "Not only has Zhang Feng disappeared, but even Cheng Chumo, Zhang Sun, Chong, and the others have disappeared." "What? They're all gone?" Li Shimin's eyes were wide open, and his face was completely pale. Zhang Sun Chong and Cheng Chumo's disappearance could still be explained as them being playful. After all, these two guys were still kids. But how could Zhang Feng disappear as well? One had to know that Zhang Feng was his life-saving straw. If he disappeared, then what should he do next? Was his crime already announced? Opening an altar to offer sacrifices to the heavens? Or announce his sins to the whole world? He sat powerlessly on the dragon throne, holding his forehead with his hand. He felt an unprecedented sense of helplessness. The oppressive atmosphere in the royal study made it hard for little Gizi to breathe. He understood the emperor's current situation, but he could not empathize with him. He could not help but feel sad. As the emperor's personal servant, he could not share the emperor's burden. He glanced at Li Shimin, and his eyes could not help but feel lonely. Just as he was about to go up and comfort him, he saw the crumpled cigarette on the table. Suddenly, a glimmer of hope ignited in his heart. Perhaps the cigarette could relieve the emperor's pain. Thinking of this, he quickly picked up the cigarette, smoothed it out, and handed it to Li Shimin. He said with concern, "Your Majesty, have a smoke. Perhaps it can help you forget those unhappiness?" Hearing this, Li Shimin's tightly closed eyes slowly opened. He rubbed his forehead with blue veins, looked at little Gizi, and nodded weakly. He knew that little Gizi was doing this for his own good. Moreover, he really did need the cigarette to relieve his tense nerves. Seeing the emperor nod, little Gizi was overjoyed. He quickly handed the cigarette over and lit it. The cigarette was slowly lit, emitting bursts of green smoke. Li Shimin took the opportunity to take a deep breath. The cigarette instantly entered his nose and stimulated his brain. Enjoying the stimulation of the cigarette, he half reclined on the dragon throne and began to recall what he had done in the past. "Big brother, fourth brother, are you really here to take my life? Or is the heavens dissatisfied with me?" Just as he was sinking into endless vexation, another set of footsteps came from outside the door. However, he was not in the mood to look at them at this time. On the other hand, little Gizi raised his head high, wanting to take a closer look. A moment later, a stooped figure slowly walked in. It was Zhang Sun Wuji, who had just knelt outside the door. Seeing this, little Gizi hurriedly went up to him and said softly, "Lord Zhang Sun, you?" He knew that the emperor's relationship with the officials was tense. It was not convenient for him to speak. Naturally, he needed a mediator like him to pass on the message. Zhang Sun Wuji glanced at little Gizi and did not reply. Instead, he looked directly at Li Shimin with a complicated expression. "Your Majesty, the situation is very serious now. The officials are all waiting for Your Majesty's reply. Has Your Majesty made a decision?" He had been kneeling outside the door for a long time. Seeing that there was no news from Li Erlang and that the officials were anxious, as a relative of the emperor, he had to come in and ask. Li Shimin naturally knew what the other party was thinking. He raised his heavy head and glanced weakly at him. "Auxiliary machine, even you want to force me? Erlang!" Zhang Sun Wuji looked at Li Shimin and choked a little. In the end, he didn't say those words because he couldn't bear it. After all, Li Erlang was his brother-in-law. The Tang dynasty could not do without the support of Zhangxuan's family. Chapter 1852. Moreover, he and Erlang were friends. In those days, he followed Erlang to quell the rebellion and planned the change of the Xuanwu Gate. Strictly speaking, half of the ghosts of the Xuanwu Gate belonged to him. Now he was forcing Erlang. It was a bit too much. Moreover, it was reasonable to say that he also had a part of the responsibility for the appearance of Mars. He couldn't sit back and do nothing. But who could resolve this disaster? Thinking of this, a figure slowly emerged in his mind. Yuan Tiangang? Wasn't he a famous warlock of the Tang dynasty? Maybe this person could resolve the crisis. Erlang, I have a plan. Ask Master Yuan Tiangang to resolve this crisis. Zhangsun Wuji said with some surprise. He had now regarded Li Shimin as a family member, so it was natural to call him Erlang. Besides, there were no outsiders now, so it didn't get in the way. Assistant, are you serious? Li Shimin stood up from the dragon chair and looked straight at Zhangsun Wuji. He had thought that his only hope was shattered, but now it seemed that it was not. Erlang, Master Yuan is a famous warlock of the Tang dynasty. As long as he does divination, there may be a way. Zhangsun Wuji's face was full of hope, and his eyes were shining. Good, good. Li Shimin nodded repeatedly, then looked at Little Gizi and hurriedly said, Little Gizi, you go to inform Yuan Tiangang and let him enter the palace. Little Gizi nodded and walked out of the door. In a moment, he disappeared from the sight of the two. Looking at the receding figure, Li Shimin could no longer sit still. He slowly walked down from the hall, took a drag of the cigarette, and kept pacing in the hall. He was upset. He was a little worried. What if Yuan Tiangang couldn't do anything? What if Yuan Tiangang was not there? Now only Yuan Tiangang could save him. Seeing Li Shimin so anxious, Zhangsun Wuji stepped forward and comforted him. Erlang, don't worry. When Master Yuan comes, everything will be clear. Hearing this, Li Shimin slowed down his steps and looked at Zhangsun Wuji. He sighed and said with some sadness, Maybe. After that, he took a deep puff of his cigarette and continued to walk around the hall. Zhangsun Wuji didn't say anything else either. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the door from afar. Only the sound of footsteps could be heard in the huge imperial study. The atmosphere was a little tense. About half an hour later, the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. Hearing this voice, Li Shimin immediately stopped. His eyes kept looking out the door, hoping to see something. It wasn't that he didn't want to go out, but he didn't dare. With so many officials kneeling outside, if he went out, wouldn't he be torn apart alive? A moment later, two figures stepped into the imperial study. They were Little Gizi and Yuan Tiangang. Commoner Yuan Tiangang pays his respects to your majesty. Yuan Tiangang made a Taoist seal with his hands and bowed. Dispense with the formality. Dispense with the formality. Li Shimin looked at Yuan Tiangang with surprise. He stepped forward and said directly, Master Yuan, I invited you here this time for the thing in the sky. I hope Master Yuan can divine it. He couldn't afford any delay now. He must solve it as soon as possible. Yuan Tiangang frowned and didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his head and glanced at the unknown object in the sky. After a while, he said mysteriously, Yes, Your Majesty. Please prepare the incense table, candlesticks, and other sacrificial items. These are all trivial matters. Taoist priest, please do it quickly. Li Shimin promised and then looked at Little Gizi who was on standby. Little Gizi, send someone to prepare the incense table and candlesticks immediately. Be quick. Yes, Your Majesty. Little Gizi bowed and turned to leave. In less than a quarter of an hour, Little Gizi led several eunuchs to come with incense, candles, yellow paper, and other sacrificial items in his hands. Sacrificial activities were often held in the palace, so these things were necessary and not difficult to find. The incense table was neatly arranged under the command of Little Gizi. The candlesticks and yellow paper were also neatly placed at the door of the imperial study. Your Majesty, the ritual needs to be done outside the door. Please move. Yuan Tiangang bowed, still in a posture of making a Taoist seal. Move? Li Shimin hesitated. There were so many officials outside the door. It was not easy to face them outside. But according to Yuan Tiangong's words, he couldn't do the ritual if he didn't go out. This? After thinking for a while, he made up his mind and nodded. Let's go. Now there was no other way. It was no big deal to come out and explain to the officials. With such an idea, Li Shimin slowly walked out of the door. As soon as he walked out of the door, he saw the officials kneeling together with an unyielding look, which made him a little sad. After all, these were the backbone of the Tang dynasty. He quickly stepped forward and said with concern, "Officials, please get up." Hearing this, the officials raised their heads and looked at Li Shimin seriously. It seemed that they didn't intend to speak. Finally, Wei Zheng, who was the leader, slowly said, "Your Majesty, have you decided?" In fact, they had seen Yuan Tiangang just now. They probably knew what the other party was here for. It was nothing more than preparing for divination and other things. However, divination could not solve this matter. Therefore, everyone still hoped that Li Shimin would issue an edict to appease heaven's anger. Chapter 1853. This, Li Shimin couldn't answer because he didn't make any decision at all. He had to cover it up and said, "Eunuch Wei, get up first. We'll talk about it later." Wei Zheng glanced at Yuan Tiangang, who was not far away. His eyes were a little complicated. It seemed that His Majesty was going to pin his hopes on this warlock. Well, let's see what tricks he could play. He didn't reply to Li Shimin, but turned to look at the officials behind him and said sonorously, "Everyone, since His Majesty is going to open the altar, let's get up and watch." After that, he picked up the crutch beside him and slowly got up. Seeing this, Li Shimin quickly stepped forward and said while holding him, "Eunuch Wei, be careful. Don't worry, Your Majesty." Wei Zheng shook off Li Shimin's hand and stood up slowly with his crutch on the ground. Li Shimin asked for a snub and let go of his hand embarrassedly. In order to cover up his embarrassment, he glanced at the officials and said, "Everyone, please get up." While speaking, the officials had got up and stood behind Wei Zheng. Of course, they got up not because of Li Shimin, but because of Wei Zheng. In their hearts, Wei Zheng was already a representative of virtue and prestige. Seeing that everyone had got up, Li Shimin turned to look at Yuan Tiangang and said seriously, "Master Yuan, can we start now?" "Your Majesty, we can start at any time." Yuan Tiangang made a Taoist gesture and nodded. "Then let's start." Li Shimin waved his hand. While speaking, he glanced at Wei Zheng, intentionally or unintentionally, with a hint of inquiry. However, Wei Zheng didn't seem to intend to speak. He just held the crutch in his hand and squinted his eyes, giving people a deep feeling. "Yes, Your Majesty." Yuan Tiangang nodded and waved his sleeves and walked to the incense table. He first glanced at the incense burner table and then glanced at the unidentified object in the sky. Then, he slowly picked up the wooden sword on the incense burner table with his left hand and held it vertically in front of him. His right hand formed a seal and placed it in front of his nose as he began to chant. Wearing an imperial canopy on the head, walking on Kuei Gang, supporting Lu Jia on the left, Lu Ding on the right, Lu Ding on the right, Huang Xin in front and Yu Zhang behind. As soon as the words left his mouth, his eyes snapped open. In that instant, they seemed to emit a bright light that was impossible to see or touch. Then, he began to brandish the wooden sword in his hand. First up, then down. It seemed disorderly, but in reality, it contained the universe within it. The 9 luminaries move in a straight line, the primeval origin lingers, the flower essence responds to the brightness, the primordial spirit disperses, the flowing infinite hope descends upon me, the radiant vermilion peak, the primordial spirit disperses, the flowing infinite hope descends upon me, the radiant vermilion peak, all things in the world, makes me a prophet. He once again placed the seal on the tip of his nose and urged the incantation with a serious face. At this moment, he seemed to have entered a state of selflessness. Everything around him had nothing to do with them. Everyone looked at this scene and didn't feel surprised because this wasn't the first time they had seen it. Every time the royal family offered sacrifices, they would let the official of the imperial astronomer perform the ceremony. Sometimes they would invite Yuan Tiangang. Although they were used to this, they still had some doubts in their hearts. Could a few words of incantation really see through this supernatural thing? It sounded a bit mysterious. Although they all had doubts in their hearts, no one said it out loud. After all, this was passed down by their ancestors for thousands of years. Maybe there really was some magical power. Li Shimin didn't know about these different thoughts of everyone. At this time, he clenched his fists and stared with his eyes wide open. It seemed that he wanted to see something from such a ceremony, but unfortunately, he didn't see anything. He now completely pinned his hopes on Yuan Tiangang, or this ceremony, so he was the most nervous and didn't want anything to happen. At this time, he was like a tight bowstring that would break with a little carelessness. Moreover, as the emperor of the Tang dynasty, he must give the world an explanation, an answer, and appease the restless people. Otherwise, how could he face the people of the Tang dynasty in the future? Thinking of this, Li Shimin's face showed the sadness again. He subconsciously took out a cigarette from his waist and stretched out his slightly trembling right hand to touch the fire roll, but he didn't feel anything. At this time, little Gizi quickly took out the fire roll from his waist and handed it over respectfully. He was the close eunuch of His Majesty, so it was necessary for him to have sharp eyes. Since he knew that His Majesty liked this kind of thing, the fire roll at his waist had never been broken. Li Shimin glanced at little Gizi out of the corner of his eye and nodded slightly. He stretched out the cigarette, lit it slowly, and took a deep breath. This relieved his tense nerves. After a while of relaxation, he moved his eyes to Yuan Tiangang, who was performing the ceremony. Yuan Tiangang had adjusted the posture of the wooden sword in his hand, but he still kept chanting. Heaven and earth are natural, the filth is dispersed, the mystery in the cave, the Taiyuan is dazzling, and the gods in all directions make me natural. The talisman of Ling Bao tells the 9 heavens. As soon as he finished speaking, he respectfully looked at the wooden sword in his hand, then placed it on the incense table. He let out a long breath, took out 3 copper coins from his sleeve, and threw them on the incense table. Then he clasped his hands together and began to chant. After a quarter of an hour, he slowly opened his eyes and looked at the copper wire. Chapter 1854. However, this result made Yuan Tiangong's pupils shrink, and his brows almost frowned together. Li Shimin noticed the abnormality and quickly stepped forward. Master, what happened? While speaking, he glanced at the copper coins on the incense table, but he couldn't understand them at all. He had to look at Yuan Tiangang and continue to ask, Taoist, what is the meaning of this divination? Everyone also looked at Yuan Tiangang nervously. Now all hope was on this person. If it was really confirmed that Mars came to the world, then His Majesty couldn't escape the responsibility. However, Yuan Tiangang didn't answer, but stared at the copper coins as if he didn't hear Li Shimin's words. He didn't pretend not to hear, nor did he deliberately not answer, but this divination. This divination didn't show an ominous divination, but why did the people say that an ominous star came to the world? Your Majesty, please look. This divination moves with thunder, disperses with wind, moistens with rain, suppresses with sun, stops with Zhen, speaks with Dui, Qian with the ruler, and Kuan with the hiding. Therefore, it is not an ominous divination. Yuan Tiangang pointed to the copper coins on the incense table and explained word by word. Not an ominous divination? Li Shimin frowned. If it was not an ominous divination, then why did the thing in the sky not disperse for a long time? Master, are you sure? He also hoped that it was not an ominous divination, but some of the things in front of him were too strange. None of them were right. The thing in the sky didn't disperse for a long time. Others said it was an ominous star and Mars, but Yuan Tiangang said it wasn't. But if it wasn't, why did the thing in the sky keep circling around Chang'an? It was really strange. Yuan Tiangang shook his head and didn't look back. No, this is not an ominous star. As soon as this remark came out, it instantly caused an uproar. The originally quiet sight also boiled up in an instant, and the surprised voices of the officials were full. Not an ominous divination? Is it really the vengeful spirit of Xuanwu Gate coming to take our lives? Yes, I think it must be. If it is not an ominous star, then there is only one possibility. Your Majesty must take responsibility. Everyone looked at Li Shimin angrily, as if he was being pointed at by 1,000 people. Since the object in the heavens was not Mars, then there was no doubt that it was the vengeful spirit of the Black Tortoise sect. The officials were convinced of this because Li Erlang had killed too many people, and now he was receiving his retribution. Everyone, please be quiet. Wei Zheng stepped forward. Seeing that everyone had stopped talking, he took a step forward and said coldly, Your Majesty, now that it's confirmed that it's not Mars, it must be the vengeful spirit of the Black Tortoise Gate. Please give the vengeful spirit an explanation, Your Majesty. He had once been a subordinate of the deposed crown prince, Li Jianqing. It was only after Li Jianqing had been killed that he had no choice but to submit to Li Erlang. Regardless of the past, since the crown prince and Prince of Qi had returned to demand his life, Li Erlang had to give an explanation. Not bad. Du Ruhui also stood up and looked at Li Shimin angrily. Now that it has been proven, Your Majesty, please give an explanation to the Black Tortoise Gate and the survivors. Your Majesty, please give an explanation to the Black Tortoise Gate. Your Majesty, please give an explanation to the Black Tortoise Gate. Your Majesty, please give an explanation to the Black Tortoise Gate. The crowd was united like never before, and their voices shook the heavens and the earth. Seeing such a situation, Li Shimin was scared out of his wits. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and cold sweat began to form on his forehead. Could it be that the officials were right? That the vengeful spirit of the Black Tortoise Gate had come to demand his life? No, it couldn't be. How could there be such a ridiculous theory? He kept on hypnotizing himself, convincing himself that it wasn't the vengeful spirit of the Black Tortoise Gate, because he couldn't believe it. If it was really the vengeful spirit, how could he face his eldest brother and fourth brother? Vengeful spirit? Li Shimin's body trembled as he muttered to himself, The vengeful spirit is here. What should I do? Your Majesty, please don't panic. Yuan Tiangang hurriedly stepped forward and held Li Shimin. Your Majesty, I have a plan. Hearing this, Li Shimin seemed to have grasped a life-saving straw. His whole person became sober. He grabbed Yuan Tiangang and asked hurriedly, Sir, do you have a brilliant plan? Tell me quickly. Issue an edict, open an altar to offer sacrifices to heaven, hold a Waterland assembly, and expiate the vengeful spirit. Yuan Tiangang knew Li Shimin's current situation, so he had to tell him everything he knew. Yes. Li Shimin was a little flustered and didn't know what to do for a while. He said casually, Issue an edict, open an altar to offer sacrifices to heaven, hold a Waterland assembly, and expiate the vengeful spirit. As soon as his voice fell, there was a rush of footsteps not far away. A group of palace maids and eunuchs came one after another. In the middle was Zhang Sunwu Go's phoenix carriage. Your Majesty. Zhang Sunwu Go began to roar before she reached him. Li Shimin looked in the direction of the voice and saw his wife. He seemed to see a glimmer of hope. Maid Guanyin. Hurry up. Zhang Sunwu Go kept urging the eunuchs carrying the phoenix carriage. Seeing that she was about to reach Li Shimin, she rushed down. Fortunately, she didn't fall. She quickly stepped forward, grabbed Li Shimin's hand, and hurriedly said, Your Majesty, what's the situation now? Chapter 1855. She was in the palace, so she naturally knew what was going on in the imperial study. However, it was inconvenient for her to come because the harem couldn't participate in politics. However, she was worried about Erlang, so she didn't care about the rules and came directly. Guanyin maid. Li Shimin stroked Zhang Sunwu Go's tear-stained face and said sorrowfully, It's the vengeful spirit of the Xuanwu Gate. Although he didn't want to admit it, the truth was in front of him. He couldn't refute it. What? Zhang Sunwu Go screamed. She couldn't believe the answer. How could it be the vengeful spirit of the Xuanwu Gate? Li Shimin didn't reply. Instead, He looked at Zhangsun Wugo and nodded heavily. Now that things had come to this, he couldn't hide it anymore. It was better to make it clear. Seeing Li Shimon's expression, Zhangsun Wugo felt as if she was hit by a heavy hammer. Cold sweat flowed down her forehead. She felt a sense of powerlessness. Suddenly, her vision turned black and she fell backward. Guanyin made. Li Shimon hugged Zhangsun Wugo and kept shaking her. His voice was a little hoarse. After a violent shake, Zhangsun Wugo slowly opened her beautiful eyes. She looked at the person in front of her and grabbed Li Shimon's wrist. Her face was a little pale. "Your Majesty, what should we do now? According to Master Yuan, I need to announce the punishment." Li Shimon looked at Zhangsun Wugo and said with a sorrowful face, "Your Majesty, how can you make such a sacrifice?" Zhangsun Wugo suddenly stood up. Her face was full of disbelief. "Sigh?" Li Shimon sighed and said helplessly, "This is the only way now. How could this be?" Zhangsun Wugo's face was pale. Cold sweat flowed down her forehead. She glanced at the civil and military officials on the ground and her husband in front of her. She really believed the vengeful spirit of the Xuanwu Gate. So many civil and military officials were present, and even the famous Yuan Tiangang of the Tang dynasty was doing divination. It seemed that things had come to an irreversible point. She could be considered as the second beneficiary of the Black Tortoise Gate's change. Now that Erlang was in trouble as the Empress, how could she sit by and do nothing? Thinking of this, she wiped away the tears that were about to fall from the corners of her eyes. She looked at Li Shimon and said seriously, "Your Majesty, this concubine is willing to go to Huashang Temple to kneel in front of the Buddha and recite sutras for 7 days to help the souls of those who have died." Once these words were spoken, the officials who were originally indignant couldn't help but feel that the Empress seemed to be more pleasing to the eye. Li Shimon didn't think so. This was his wife. When he thought of his wife praying to Buddha for what he had done, he couldn't help but feel touched. Guanyin made, "Your Majesty." Zhangsun Wugo slowly pushed Li Shimon away and said with concern, "Your Majesty, please personally preside over the Water and Land Assembly and release the souls from purgatory." "Good. Zhen will preside over the Water and Land Assembly." Li Shimon nodded heavily. Now that the Empress could make such a sacrifice, as the Emperor, of course, he had to set an example. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Zhangsun Wugo bowed, and then turned to walk towards the Phoenix carriage. Now she didn't dare to delay. Every moment she went to Huashang Temple meant that she could release one more soul. Watching the Empress figure gradually disappear, Li Shimon withdrew his gaze and looked at the officials. With a solemn expression, he said, "Wei Zhang, write an edict for Zhen. Zhangsun Wuji, prepare for the Water and Land Assembly. Xu Jindo, the imperial astronomer, prepare for the sacrificial ceremony." "Yes, Your Majesty." The officials looked at each other, and the expressions on their faces finally eased a bit. "In that case, everyone can go and prepare." Li Shimon had a bitter expression as he responded. Finishing, he turned and walked towards the imperial study. After returning to the imperial study, he sat weakly on the dragon throne. He slowly took out a cigarette from his waist and put it in his mouth. Little Gizi hurriedly took out a match and lit it. He took a deep breath and tried to relax himself. Now that the dust had settled, the edict had been issued, the preparations for the Water and Land Assembly had begun, and the sacrificial ceremony was about to begin. He had given an explanation to the people of the world. But this also confirmed that he was incompetent and had killed the innocent. But what else could he do? He glanced at the officials who had left the imperial study. Waves of helplessness spread through his body. The officials had forced him to abdicate. The people were at odds with him. This was a last resort. He hoped that after the storm, the people of the world would forget about this matter. Even if he broke his teeth and swallowed it down, he couldn't find anyone to talk to because he could only blame himself for this matter. These were the souls of Xian Wu sect. Basically, each one of them was his family. Yet these family members had died under his blade. Now that they were coming for his life, what could he blame them for? He could only silently endure it. But If Feng Zi was here, he might be able to turn the tide. That guy had a lot of ideas. Thinking of Feng Zi, he suddenly trembled. He seemed to have thought of something. Feng Zi was missing? That guy hadn't shown up. Could it be that something had happened? Ever since he met Zhang Feng, he deeply understood his talent. It could be said that he was one of a kind in the Tang dynasty. He had also become friends with him. Unknowingly, Zhang Feng had also become one of the most important people in his life. Chapter 1856. Now that he was missing, how could he not be worried? If something happened to him, what would happen to White Deer College? What about the workshop? What about the research institute? Who else would help him? Who else in the world would speak up for him? What about the Tang dynasty? No. He didn't dare to think about it anymore. He only felt his body tremble. Little Gizi immediately asked Chang Yaojin to go to White Deer College to find Feng Zi. No matter what, we must find her. Li Shimin stood up and raised his trembling right hand. He was a little emotional. Your Majesty, are you okay? Little Gizi hurriedly went forward to support Li Shimin and asked worriedly. I'm fine. Li Shimin shook his head and hurriedly said, quickly send Chang Yaojin to find Feng Zi. Yes, Your Majesty. Little Gizi nodded, but he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he looked at Li Shimin and asked worriedly, Your Majesty, President Zhang went missing with Chang Chumo and Zhang Sun. If you ask High Duke Lu to find them, is it? He didn't finish his sentence because eunuchs couldn't participate in politics. He just wanted to remind His Majesty. What if Chang Yaojin caused trouble? It's fine. Just do as I say. Li Shimin waved his hand and didn't care so much. In his opinion, once Chang Chumo went missing, Chang Yaojin would be the most anxious. He would definitely do his best to find them. Besides, the news couldn't be hidden. He would find out sooner or later. Yes, Your Majesty. Little Gizi nodded. Although he was worried about His Majesty, he didn't dare to disobey. He could only quickly walk out of the imperial study, hoping to help His Majesty a little more. Thinking of this, he quickened his pace and walked towards the Vermilion Bird Gate. As he walked, he kept looking around, as if he was looking for something. At this moment, a figure not far ahead attracted his attention. High Duke Lu, wait. Little Gizi kept waving his hands and screaming at the top of his lungs. Chang Yaojin was just about to go out, when he suddenly heard someone calling him. He subconsciously glanced back and saw that it was Little Gizi. He asked doubtfully, Little Gizi, why did you call me? Grand Duke, wait. His Majesty has something to tell you. Little Gizi arrived in front of Chang Yaojin, panting heavily. Do you have any orders for me? Chang Yaojin asked subconsciously. Then he felt that something was not right. Puzzled, he asked, What can Your Majesty order me to do? Big news. Zhang Feng is missing. Xiao Gizi cried out in surprise. He knew Zhang Feng's position in His Majesty's heart and naturally did not dare to slight him. What? Feng Zi is missing? Chang Yaojin's eyes widened as he grabbed Xiao Gizi's collar in disbelief. What's going on? Duke, let go of this servant first. Xiao Gizi tugged at Chang Yaojin's arm and was a little out of breath. Speak quickly. Chang Yaojin let go of Xiao Gizi with a malevolent expression. Xiao Gizi tugged at his collar and hurriedly said, His Majesty just sent people to find Zhang Feng, but there was no one in White Deer College. He should be missing. Missing? How could he be missing? Chang Yaojin cried out in surprise. Then, he seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly said, Then what about my son? He's always with Feng Zi. Now that Feng Zi is missing, what about my son? His son was currently working under Zhang Feng. If Zhang Feng was missing, then what about his son? Would he be missing as well? These were all possibilities, so he had to ask clearly. Xiao Gizi was a little guilty. He knew Chang Yaojin's temper. If he said something wrong, he would beat him up. If he said it now, he might end up with a black nose and swollen eyes. What is this? Hurry up and King say it. Chang Yaojin waved his clenched fists impatiently, as if he was going to beat someone up at the slightest sign of something wrong. Duke, please calm down. Xiao Gizi hurriedly fawned over him and smiled charmingly. Duke, your son went missing with Zhang Feng. What? Chang Yaojin widened his eyes in disbelief. In his eyes, his son was the lifeblood of the Cheng family. He couldn't go missing, and he wasn't allowed to go missing. Now that something had happened to him, he couldn't accept it. You bastard! Why didn't you say so earlier? He cursed silently. Then, without waiting for Xiao Gizi's reaction, he turned and walked out of the palace gates. He quickly walked out of the palace gates, jumped onto his horse, and galloped towards White Deer College. Behind him were dozens of Cheng Residence's retainers. At this moment, the situation on Cheng and Main Street was slightly better. It wasn't as chaotic as before, and the roads were cleared. Chang Yaojin galloped towards White Deer College. There weren't any obstructions on the way. Chang Yaojin arrived at White Deer College in a short period of time. He jumped off his horse and rushed towards the college. Where is everyone? Where did they all die? He started to shout as soon as he reached the field. Who's making such a big fuss? Yu Shernan walked out of the classroom with some dissatisfaction. He looked towards the source of the sound and saw Chang Yaojin. He frowned. What are you shouting for? Chapter 1857. When Chang Yaojin saw Yu Shernan, it was as if he had seen his savior. He was delighted and quickly ran forward. Old man Yu? What did you call me? Yu Shernan frowned and was very dissatisfied. This guy did not know how to respect people when he opened his mouth. He had already despised this guy. Haha, Mr. Bosher. Chang Yaojin also quickly noticed that something was wrong with Yu Shernan. He quickly changed his words and said, Mr. Bosher, have you seen my son? He had completely thrown Zhang Feng to the back of his mind and was only thinking about his son. Your son? Yu Shernan frowned and said doubtfully, You should go home to find your son. Why did you come to the academy? He had never liked this rude guy. He even called him old man just now. He did not have a good impression of him. Now he was looking for his son and found the academy? How improper. Although he was dissatisfied, he still responded with his mouth. Oh, my son is missing. Chang Yaojin was so anxious that he stamped his feet. But he could do nothing. He knew that the old man in front of him did not even need to salute to his majesty. He could not do anything to him. Go home to find your son. Don't yell in the academy. Otherwise, old man will report you. Yu Shernan snorted and turned to leave. He did not want to stay with this illiterate guy for another quarter of an hour. Old man you? Chang Yaojin stretched out his right hand and called out unwillingly. However, Yu Shernan did not intend to look back. Looking at the disappearing figure, he glared at him and was somewhat dissatisfied. When he was about to walk to the other classrooms, a figure slowly walked towards him. Haha, there's a chance. Chang Yaojin smiled and was somewhat proud. He crossed his hands and blocked the door of the classroom. Boy, wait. The person suddenly looked up and was somewhat puzzled. You are. Don't ask who I am first. Chang Yaojin waved his hand and put on an intimidating look. Let me ask you, are you from the academy? Why do I feel like I've seen you there before? That's right. My name is Yuan Hong. I was the flag bearer for the previous basketball match. The person replied timidly. He knew that the academy often came to look for the dean. The person in front of him was probably one of them. He couldn't afford to offend him. Perhaps he could use the basketball game to suppress his arrogance. Yuan Hong? Chang Yaojin raised his head and muttered to himself. Then, he looked at Yuan Hong and revealed a malicious expression. Let me ask you, where did your dean go? Now that old man Yu was out of the question, he had already offended him. He could only find some clues from these students. Dean? Yuan Hong scratched his head as if he was thinking about something. After a while, he said slowly, I remember now. The last time the dean went to the research institute, he hasn't returned until now. There were also a few people from the workshop who went with him. Research Institute. Chang Yaojin's eyes darted around. He finally found some useful clues, but it wasn't enough. Do you know what they went to do? I don't know. How can we ask about the dean's business? Yuan Hong shook his head and was a little nervous. If you don't know, why are you talking about it? Seriously. Cheng Yaojin secretly spat. He glared at Yuan Hong and walked straight to the entrance of the academy. Only a petrified back view was left. So he was the one who told the other party the news and got scolded? What was this? Yuan Hong shook off the dissatisfaction in his heart and walked to the classroom. Looking back at Cheng Yaojin, he took the reins from the servant and ran straight to the research institute. Now that there was news, he couldn't slack off. What if his son was in danger? What if Zhang Feng had some bad idea to bring his son along? Then his Cheng family would be ruined. Thinking of this, he became even more anxious. He whipped the back of the horse and galloped away. A moment later, Cheng Yaojin arrived at the entrance of the research institute. He jumped off the horse and rushed in. "Is there anyone? Is there anyone?" He shouted at the top of his lungs, trying to find someone he knew. Coincidentally, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were on the field. When they heard the shout, they subconsciously glanced over. "Who is it? What are you shouting about?" "Ha ha! It's you too." Cheng Yaojin looked in the direction of the voice. It was as if he had discovered a new continent. This was because he still remembered the scene of Zhang Feng scolding these two fellows. "Who are you? Do we know you?" Hao Chujun looked at Ma Zhou with a face full of question marks. The two of them were waiting here for their teacher. In the end, this person came over. They didn't know him at all, but he was still trying to worm his way into being friends. "You don't need to know who I am?" Cheng Yaojin waved his hand generously as if to say that he didn't care. Then he quickly said, "Where did your teacher go? And my son?" "Teacher?" Ma Zhou frowned and glanced at the sky. Teacher had brought Chang Chumo and the others to the sky and hadn't come down yet. How was he going to tell others? Could it be that teacher had researched the flying artifact and gone to the sky? No one would believe that. Chapter 1858. Looking at Ma Zhou's actions, Cheng Yaojin also subconsciously glanced at the sky. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't see what it was. He could only urge, "Where did Fengzi go?" This. Ma Zhou looked at Hao Chujun, his eyes somewhat evasive. Hao Chujun naturally understood. He looked at Cheng Yaojin and smiled. "My teacher has something to do and will not be back for a while." This was just him making things up. In fact, even he himself didn't know when his teacher would come back. Cheng Yaojin naturally saw the two's little actions. He was very suspicious that the disappearance of Fengzi and his son was definitely related to these two guys. "Then what about my son? Chang Tinyu?" "Oh, your son. He also went with my master." Hao Chujun lied without blushing. "Went out together?" Cheng Yaojin was somewhat doubtful. His son would discuss everything with him. This time he actually dared to hide it from him. This was impossible. He looked at the two of them unwillingly, trying to find some clues. At this time, the iron wire under their feet and the brazier attracted his attention. "What is this?" Cheng Yaojin pointed at the iron wire on the ground and asked. This is something we got to play with." Hao Chujun laughed and was about to pick up the thing on the ground. This thing belonged to his teacher, he couldn't let this guy ruin it. "Let me see." Cheng Yaojin snatched the iron wire from Hao Chujun's hand. He had a feeling that Fengzi's disappearance was related to this guy in front of him. Moreover, these two guys were protecting the iron wire. Maybe there was some conspiracy. "I can see that you two are not honest. Were you lying to me just now? Tell me. Why would we lie to you?" Hao Chujun smiled. "You are Brother Tinyu's father, which means you are our father." After saying that, he gave Ma Zhou a look, wanting him to say something good. Ma Zhou understood and quickly stepped forward. He smiled and said, "Yes, you are Tinyo's father. Why would we lie to you?" As he spoke, he reached out to grab the iron wire in Cheng Yaojin's hand, trying to take it back. However, this guy was too strong and couldn't move it at all, so he could only give up. "Stop trying to bewitch Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu won't fall for it." Cheng Yaojin glared at the two of them and waved the wire in his hand. "Lao Tzu thinks that the disappearance of Fengzi and my son is related to the two of you. If you don't tell me, Lao Tzu will punish you right now." "We really don't know." Ma Zhou pulled a long face and said in a pleading tone, "You just said that Fengzi went on a long trip, and now you say that you don't know. There is indeed a problem. Chang Yaojin sneered. After saying that, he put down the iron wire in his hand and rolled up his sleeves. It seemed that he was about to go all out. What are you doing? You can't mess around. Ma Zhou's expression changed and he stepped back. This is the research institute. You can't behave atrociously here. Yes, this is the research institute. You can't mess around. Hao Chujun was also a little scared and stepped back. Can't mess around? Chang Yaojin sneered and said indifferently, Lao Tzu doesn't care about you. After saying that, he strode forward, grabbed Ma Zhou's arm, and threw him over his shoulder. Ma Zhou was a scholar. How could he withstand Chang Yaojin's torment? He immediately fell to the ground and wailed. Seeing this, Hao Chujun's face changed. He was about to run away when Chang Yaojin used total annihilation. Hao Chujun fell forward and fell on his face like a dog eating mud. Humph, Lao Tzu could beat 10 of you back then. Chang Yaojin glanced at the two people on the ground with disdain. After saying that, he pulled Ma Zhou's left leg with his left hand and Hao Chujun's right leg with his right hand. He pulled the two people together, then picked up the iron wire on the ground and tied their left and right legs together. Okay, are you willing to talk now? Chang Yaojin sat on the ground and looked at the two people in front of him who were somewhat aggrieved. He smiled. Brother, please let us go. We really don't know anything. Hao Chujun wiped the dirt from the corner of his mouth and begged. Shut up. Chang Yaojin roared. Just now, he was trying to talk nicely to these two guys. In the end, these two guys refused to listen to him. Now that they had been defeated, they were still so stubborn. Did they not know the feeling of losing a son? They really had a heart of stone. You two dogs. Now that my son is missing, of course you are not worried. But I am. I don't care if you are Feng Zi's disciples or not. If you don't talk, Lao Tzu will throw you under the tree for 3 days and 3 nights. I guarantee that you will become dry corpses. After saying that, he glanced at the locust tree on the side of the field and said with a fierce look, How about it? Are you going to talk or not? This. Ma Zhou trembled and looked at Chang Yaojin. He didn't know what to say. He was very afraid that this guy in front of him would really hang him under the tree. How could he establish a foothold in the institute in the future? However, he was afraid that if he said it, his teacher would be unhappy and expel him from the institute. Chapter 1859. What are you talking about? You motherf asterisk cur. Are you a scholar again? Chang Yaojin glared and slapped Ma Zhou's face. As he slapped him, he said unhappily, Lao Tzu asked you to stay here. Hurry up and say it. Stop hitting me. I'll say it. Hao Chujun looked at Ma Zhou who was being abused. He couldn't bear it because he wasn't sure if he would be the next one. It was better to say it earlier. However, he couldn't say everything. He decided to leave out half of it. You want to say it? Chang Yaojin glanced at Hao Chujun and was delighted. Then, he looked at Ma Zhou and put down his half-swollen face. See, you should have said it earlier. You just like to be abused. After he said that, he looked at Hao Chujun and smiled. Hurry up and say it. Lao Tzu doesn't wait for anyone. Hao Chujun glanced at Ma Zhou who wanted to cry but had no tears. He seemed to have made up his mind and said, We only know that our teacher has been researching something that can fly into the sky. These few days, Tai Nyo and the others have been helping our teacher. Then he disappeared. We don't know what happened to him. We don't dare to ask about our teacher. After he said that, he glanced at Ma Zhou as if to say, Look, what did I say? Ma Zhou gave him a look of disdain. Something that can fly into the sky? Chang Yaojin raised his head and glanced at the sky. He was a little confused. What could fly into the sky? Was this a F** king dream? He didn't believe it. He turned and stared at Hao Chujun. Are you F** king lying to Lao Tzu? What can fly into the sky? Unless it's that jinx. How would we dare to lie to you? Look, Ma Zhou has been beaten up to this state. I wouldn't dare to lie to you even if I had 8 guts. Hao Chujun looked troubled. He said it as if he was more wronged than Ma Zhou. Chang Yaojin nodded. He also believed that this guy wouldn't dare to lie to him. However, this was a little unbelievable. Something that could fly into the sky? What kind of king genius could do this? However, the jinx in the sky was also something that could fly into the sky. It was hard to say. A jinx. Could the thing that Feng Zi created be related to the thing in the sky? If this was true, then it would be terrible. Right now, the entire country thought that it was the vengeful spirit of the Black Marital School. If Feng Zi and Tainyo were up there, would they be in any danger? Thinking of this, he was a little uneasy. He turned around and walked towards the entrance of the research institute. He had to go back and report to Her Majesty about such an important matter. Don't go. Untie us. Wait. How Chu-jun and Ma Zhou's screams came from behind him, but it did not affect his determination to return to the palace. Chang Yaojin quickly walked out of the research institute, jumped onto the back of a horse, and galloped in the direction of the palace. Now that his son was in danger, all the more he couldn't slack off. If the two of them fell from the sky, then the Chung family's bloodline would end. With that thought in mind, he whipped his horse and arrived at the palace in no time. Within the imperial study, Li Shimin was sitting on the dragon throne, thinking about what to do next. Now that the commoners had been pacified, the punishment had already been announced, and it would probably cause another storm. What should he do then? This was giving him a headache. Just as he was worrying, there was a rush of footsteps outside the door. Your Majesty, something has happened. Chang Yaojin began to shout as soon as he stepped into the imperial study. What happened? Li Shimin slowly raised his head, looking listless. For him, there was nothing worse now. After all, he had already prepared to announce his punishment. Could there be anything worse than this? The thing in the sky was made by Feng Zi. Chang Yaojin quickly stepped forward with a face full of impatience. What? Li Shimin suddenly stood up and widened his eyes. What did you just say? Say it again? Your Majesty, the thing in the sky was made by Feng Zi. He is now in the sky and even my son is there. Chang Yaojin looked embarrassed and said in a wrong tone. What the hell is going on? Li Shimin frowned, his hands trembling. How did you know? He still found it hard to believe because he didn't dare to believe that people could go up to the sky, and more than one person. He also didn't know why Feng Zi made this thing. Your Majesty, I heard it from his disciple. It is all true. Chang Yaojin had a long face, as if something had happened to his son. He had always treated his son like a treasure, and now that something like this had happened, he was actually more anxious than anyone else. How could this be? What does Feng Zi want to do? Li Shimin seemed to have lost all his strength as he sat on the dragon throne. He had always thought that the thing in the sky was the vengeful spirit of the Xuanwu Gate, but now he was being told that it was man-made? He really couldn't accept it. Moreover, the punishment had been announced, the water and land assembly, and the sacrificial ceremony had already begun. To say this now was simply a blow. These things had already begun to be prepared, and it was impossible to take them back. If he had known about this earlier, he might have had a chance to salvage everything. Now, there was no chance at all.